Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Shadow Man Stories. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now, let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Eugene Buckley, but folks around here just call me Gene. I've been a ranger in the Daniel F. Creek National Forest for 19 years now, ever since I came back from Korea in '57. At 41, I know these West Virginia mountains better than most people know their own backyards. My great-great-grandfather settled in these hollers back in 1847. So you could say this land is in my blood. Martha always jokes that I married the forest first and her second. She's not wrong. These 847 square miles of wilderness are my responsibility, and I take that seriously. I've got two daughters, ages 16 and 14, and I want this place to stay wild and safe for their children someday. People around here love to tell stories about things that go bump in the night. Boogers, they call them, creatures that live in the deep woods where normal folks don't go. My Cherokee grandfather used to fill my head with tales about spirits that guard sacred places. I listened politely, but I never believed a word of it. I always figured the old-timers' booger tales were just meant to keep city folks out of our hollers. See, I'm an educated man. I know the difference between a bear track and a human track. I can tell if someone's been drinking too much moonshine and seeing things that aren't there. After 19 years patrolling these mountains, I thought I'd seen everything there was to see. I was wrong. It started on October 18th, 1976, with a crackling radio call at 6:47 inches the morning. Gene, you there? It was dispatch. Got a couple overdue in Blackwater Hollow. Jim and Helen Morrison from Richmond, due back yesterday. Blackwater Hollow. Of all the places in my territory, that one always gave me pause. It's an 8-mile-long valley with no road access, sitting between 2,400 and 3,800 feet above sea level. Takes a 12-mile hike just to get there, and the last 4 miles aren't even marked on most maps. Perfect place for experienced hikers to get in trouble. What's their background? I asked, already pulling on my boots. Mid-40s, been hiking together for 15 years. Planned a 2-day photography trip to the old burial mounds. Supposed to check in yesterday evening. The burial mounds. 3 Cherokee burial sites that are older than anyone can remember. My grandfather used to say they were sacred, that the Cherokee called this place where the earth breathes. I just knew them as interesting historical sites that drew photographers and archaeologists. I'll head out in 30 minutes, I said. Weather's been good. They probably just found a great photo spot and lost track of time. But as I packed my gear, radio, first aid kit, rope, emergency supplies, something felt off. The morning was too quiet. Usually, I can hear birds singing, squirrels chattering, the normal sounds of a forest waking up. Today, nothing, just the wind moving through the trees. At 5:30 a.m., I started up the trail to Blackwater Hollow. The October air was crisp, with that bite that promises winter's coming soon. Perfect hiking weather. Perfect tracking conditions, too. The ground was still soft from recent rain. I'd walked this trail hundreds of times, but today felt different. Can't explain why. Maybe it was just worry about the missing couple. In 19 years, I'd only lost one hiker permanently, and that was a fool kid who went off-trail during a blizzard. 3 hours in, I found their dog. Rusty, a golden retriever, came running down the trail toward me, whimpering and scared. His fur was matted with burrs, and he had scratches on his nose like he'd been pushing through thick brush. The strange thing was, he wouldn't go back the way he came. Every time I tried to get him to lead me to his owners, he'd just whine and pull toward the way out. "Where are Jim and Helen, boy?" I asked, scratching behind his ears. "What happened up there?" That's when I noticed how quiet it was. No bird songs, no insects, even the wind had died down. The only sound was Rusty's panting and the crunch of leaves under my feet. I should have turned back right then. 4 miles deeper into the hollow, I found their campsite. It was set up in a perfect spot beside a natural spring, the kind of place that shows real wilderness experience. 2-person tent, camp stove, food hung properly to keep bears away. Everything looked normal from a distance. But when I got closer, the wrongness hit me like a slap. The tent was standing, but the zipper was pulled open from the inside. Sleeping bags were still laid out neat and tidy. Their expensive hiking boots sat beside the tent opening, placed so carefully they looked like they were on display in a store window. Coffee was still warm in the metal pot. I checked my watch. 11:15 a.m. Their coffee was still warm after being missing for nearly 24 hours. "Jim, Helen," I called out. My voice echoed wrong, like it was bouncing off something that shouldn't be there. "This is Ranger Buckley. If you can hear me, call out." Nothing but my own echo coming back from the wrong direction. I started searching the area in a careful grid pattern, the way I'd been trained. Found their cameras sitting on a log, expensive Nikons that no serious photographer would abandon. Film was still in them, but when I tried to advance it, the mechanism jammed. That's when I saw the tracks. At first, I thought they were human footprints, bare feet, which was strange enough in October, but these were wrong. Size 15 at least, maybe bigger. The toes were too long, stretched out like fingers. And they were deep, pressed into the earth like whatever made them weighed twice what a normal person should. The tracks led away from the campsite toward the burial mounds. I followed them, my hand resting on the radio clipped to my belt. But when I tried to call for backup, all I got was static. Strange. I'd had good signal just a mile back. The tracks led through a stand of rhododendron bushes that grew thick as a wall. I had to push through sideways, branches catching at my jacket. When I came out the other side, I was standing in a small clearing I'd never seen before. And I'd been patrolling this area for 19 years. In the center of the clearing sat a circle of stones. Not Cherokee work. This was older, cruder. The stones were arranged around a patch of earth that looked freshly turned, like something had been digging up from underneath. Jim and Helen's hiking boots sat in the exact center of the circle. That's when the smell hit me. Sulfur, like rotten eggs, but underneath it something else. Something organic and wrong, like meat that's been left out too long. I picked up one of the boots. Still warm. "This is impossible," I said out loud, just to hear a human voice in that awful quiet place. People don't just vanish. But even as I said it, I was backing away from those stones. Every instinct I developed in 19 years of wilderness work was screaming at me to get out now. I made it maybe 50 yards before I heard it. A sound like nothing I'd ever heard before. Low and rumbling, like a landslide starting, but with something almost like music in it. It seemed to come from underground, vibrating up through the soles of my boots. And then something answered it from the ridge above me. I looked up and saw a shape moving through the trees. Tall, too tall to be human. It moved wrong, too, flowing through the forest without making a sound, like it was part of the shadows between the trees. My radio crackled to life. Static, then voices speaking in a language I didn't recognize. Old language, with sounds like wind through caves. The voices were getting closer. I ran. Crashed through those rhododendron bushes like they weren't there, branches tearing at my face and hands. Behind me, that rumbling sound was getting louder, and I could hear trees creaking like something massive was moving through them. I didn't stop running until I reached the Morrisons' campsite. My hands were shaking as I tried the radio again. This time I got through. "Base, this is Buckley. I need backup in Blackwater Hollow. 2 missing hikers, and I've got..." I paused. "Got what?" "Weird tracks and strange sounds? Boots arranged in circles by something that couldn't exist?" "Roger, Gene, what's your status?" "I found their campsite. Signs of disturbance. I'm requesting immediate backup." 10-4. Dispatching Whitman and Mendez. ETA 4 hours. 4 hours. In this place, 4 hours felt like forever. I settled in to wait, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me from the tree line. Every time I looked directly at the shadows between the trees, they seemed normal. But in my peripheral vision, I kept catching glimpses of movement, of something tall and dark that shouldn't be there. The sun was getting lower, and I was starting to realize that whatever happened to Jim and Helen Morrison, it wasn't any kind of accident I'd ever seen before. And night was coming to Blackwater Hollow. Jake Whitman and Carlos Mendez arrived just as the sun was touching the ridge. Jake and I had worked together for 8 years, and Carlos was one of our best trackers. Seeing their familiar faces should have made me feel better. It didn't. "What we got, Gene?" Jake asked, setting down his pack. He was all business, the way he always was on search and rescue. I showed them the campsite, the abandoned gear, the warm coffee that shouldn't exist. I didn't mention the stone circle or the impossible tracks. Not yet. Could be a bear, Carlos suggested, examining the tent. Sometimes they'll investigate a camp without doing much damage. No claw marks, I said. No scat, no signs of feeding. Medical emergency? Jake was checking around the tent perimeter. Maybe one of them got hurt, other one went for help? I wanted to agree with him, wanted it to be something normal, something we could handle with standard procedures. But then Carlos called out from the tree line. "Gene, you need to see this." He was kneeling beside a tree, about 30 yards from camp. The bark had been stripped away in long gouges, starting about 4 feet off the ground and going up to 12 feet. The marks were too regular to be from a bear, too deep to be from any normal animal. "What kind of claws do this?" Carlos asked. Before I could answer, Jake's radio crackled. "Base, this is Whitman. We're going to need a K9 unit out here. And maybe contact the state police." "Negative on the K9, came the reply. "Dogs won't work in that area. Every unit we've brought to Blackwater Hollow refuses to track." Jake and I looked at each other. In 8 years of partnership, I'd never heard of tracking dogs refusing to work. "What do you mean, refuses?" Jake keyed his radio again. "Dogs get about 6 miles up that trail and won't go any further. Whine, try to turn around, sometimes they just lie down and won't move. Happened 3 times in the last 5 years. That's when I told them about the tracks and the stone circle. Carlos went pale when I described the footprints. My grandmother used to tell stories about things like that. Back in New Mexico, on the reservation. "What kind of stories?" I asked. "Things that weren't quite human. Guardians of sacred places. She called them the tall ones. Said they only came out when someone disturbed the old burial grounds." Jake was shaking his head. "Come on, guys, we're talking about missing hikers, not some Indian legend." But I could see he was nervous too. We all were. As darkness fell, we set up a base camp and planned our search pattern for the morning. 3-man teams, radio contact every hour, nobody goes off alone, standard procedure. Except, there was nothing standard about what happened that night. I was on first watch when I heard Carlos scream. It was 11:47 p.m. I know because I checked my watch right before it happened. The scream came from the direction of the burial mounds, about half a mile away. High and terrified, then cut off suddenly. Jake was out of his sleeping bag before the echo died. That was Carlos. We grabbed our flashlights and ran toward the sound. Our lights cut through the darkness, but they seemed dimmer than they should be, like the black was pushing back against them. We found Carlos standing perfectly still in the clearing with the stone circle. His flashlight was on the ground beside him, beam pointing up into the trees. He was staring straight ahead, not blinking, not moving. "Carlos!" Jake shook his shoulder. "Carlos, what happened?" No response. Carlos just stood there like a statue. That's when I saw them. Footprints in the soft earth around the circle. Fresh ones, still drying, but these weren't the elongated human tracks I'd found earlier. These were from bare human feet. Normal size, normal shape. Jim and Helen Morrison's footprints, walking in a perfect circle around the stones. "Jake," I whispered, "look at the ground." He swept his light across the tracks, and I watched his face go white. "That's impossible. Those prints are fresh. 10 minutes old at most." We both turned our lights toward the tree line, searching for any sign of the missing couple. That's when we saw it. Something tall was standing just inside the edge of the forest. Too tall to be human, too still to be natural. Our flashlight beams seemed to slide off it like it was made of shadow. It was watching us. "Jesus Christ," Jake breathed. The thing tilted its head, and I caught a glimpse of pale eyes reflecting our lights. Then it stepped backward into the trees and vanished. "Carlos." I grabbed his arm. "Carlos, we need to move, now." Still no response. His eyes were open but empty, like nobody was home behind them. Jake and I each took one of Carlos's arms and half carried, half dragged him back to camp. He didn't resist, but he didn't help either. Just let us move him like a mannequin. We got him into his sleeping bag and took turns watching him the rest of the night. His breathing was normal, his pulse was steady, but he wouldn't respond to anything we said or did. When morning came, Carlos was gone. I mean gone. His sleeping bag was empty, still zipped up from the inside. No tracks leading away from camp, no sign of struggle. It was like he'd just disappeared into thin air. Jake was ready to call for a full search and rescue operation, bring in helicopters and tracking teams. But I knew it wouldn't help. Whatever was happening in Blackwater Hollow, it wasn't something that could be solved with more rangers and better equipment. I was starting to understand why the old-timers told their booger stories. And I was starting to think my Cherokee grandfather might have been trying to warn me about something real. "We're getting out of here," Jake said, rolling up his sleeping bag. "Right now, this is way beyond what 2 rangers can handle." I wanted to agree with him. Every rational part of my mind was screaming that we should retreat, call for help, let someone else figure out what was happening in Blackwater Hollow. But I kept thinking about Jim and Helen Morrison. About Carlos, who'd vanished from a zipped sleeping bag without leaving a single track. About those fresh footprints walking in circles around ancient stones. "They're still alive," I said. "The Morrisons. Those were their tracks last night. Jean, listen to yourself. People don't just walk around in circles after being missing for 2 days. Not unless." "Unless what?" Jake's face went gray. "Unless something's controlling them." That's when we heard the voice calling from deep in the forest. A woman's voice, weak and scared. "Help us, please, somebody help us." "Helen Morrison." Jake grabbed my arm as I started toward the voice. "Don't. It's a trap. That's a real person calling for help." "Is it? How do you know?" The voice came again, closer this time. "We're hurt, we can't move, please." I shook off Jake's grip and started into the trees. Behind me, I heard him curse and follow. We moved carefully, flashlights ready, even though it was full daylight. The voice kept calling, leading us deeper into the forest, toward the burial mounds. 20 minutes in, we found them. Jim and Helen Morrison were sitting against the base of the largest burial mound, exactly where the Cherokee used to lay their dead. They looked unharmed, but wrong somehow. Their clothes were clean, their hair was neat, and they sat perfectly still with their hands folded in their laps, like they were posing for a photograph. "Jim, Helen?" I approached slowly. "I'm Ranger Buckley. We've been looking for you." They turned their heads toward me in perfect unison. Their eyes were open, but they had that same empty look I'd seen in Carlos. "We're fine," Helen said in a voice like a recording. "We're staying here now." "The hell you are." Jake moved to Helen's other side. "Come on. We're getting you out of here." That's when the ground started to shake. It began as a low rumble, like distant thunder, then built into something that made the trees sway and sent rocks tumbling down the hillside. The burial mound behind the Morrisons started to crack open, and something emerged. It rose out of the earth like it was swimming up through water, 9 feet tall, covered in dark hair, with arms that hung nearly to its knees. Its face was wrong. Too long, with a heavy brow and pale green eyes that seemed to glow in the forest shadows. The Kekle Kudle, the Earth Keeper. My grandfather's stories flooded back to me. "The guardian sleeps beneath the sacred places," he'd said. "But when the old graves are disturbed, when outsiders come to steal or defile, it wakes. And it protects what must be protected." The creature looked at Jake and me with those terrible eyes, and when it spoke, its voice rumbled through the ground like an earthquake. "You have come to the sacred place. You have brought others who do not belong. This cannot be allowed." Jake raised his gun. When had he drawn his gun? But the creature moved faster than anything that size should move. It flowed across the clearing like smoke and backhanded Jake into a tree. I heard ribs crack. "The guardianship has been ignored too long," the creature continued, turning those pale eyes on me. "Too many outsiders, too much disturbance. The compact must be renewed." "What compact?" I managed to say. "Your grandfather knew. His grandfather knew. For 5 generations, the Buckley clan has protected this place. But you forgot. You let them come here with their cameras and their curiosity. You let them disturb the sleeping dead." Images flashed through my mind, memories that weren't mine. My great-grandfather standing in this same clearing, making some kind of promise to a creature of shadow and earth. My grandfather leaving offerings at the burial mounds, warning people away from certain areas. "I didn't know," I said. "Now you do." The creature gestured toward Jim and Helen. "They will stay, as the others stayed, as guardians. Unless what? Unless you take your grandfather's place. Become the protector this place needs. Keep the outsiders away from the sacred ground." Jake was trying to get back on his feet, blood running from his mouth. The creature looked at him and shook its massive head. He has seen too much. He cannot leave unchanged. No, I stepped between Jake and the creature. I'll make the deal. I'll be the guardian. But you let him go. Let all of them go. The creature studied me with those ancient eyes. You would bind yourself to this place, guard the sacred ground until death, keep the secret of the sleeping dead? I thought about my daughters, about Martha, about the life I'd be giving up. Then I looked at Jim and Helen sitting like dolls against the burial mound, and at Jake bleeding on the forest floor. I'll do it. The creature nodded slowly. Then let the compact be renewed. It reached out one massive hand and placed it on my forehead. The touch burned like ice and fire at the same time, and I felt something fundamental change inside me. A connection to the earth beneath my feet, an awareness of every living thing in the hollow, and the terrible responsibility of keeping the old secrets safe. It is done, the creature said, and sank back into the earth like it had never been there at all. Jake doesn't remember what happened in Blackwater Hollow. Neither do Jim and Helen Morrison. According to the official report, they suffered from severe hypothermia and temporary confusion. All three were found after a 2-day search, healthy but unable to recall the specifics of their ordeal. Carlos Mendez transferred to a desk job in Charleston. He never talks about his time in the field anymore. I'm still a ranger, still patrol the same territory I've covered for 19 years, but now I'm something else too. I can feel the creature, the Kekla Kudla, sleeping beneath the sacred ground. I know when it stirs, when something threatens the old burial places. I dream its dreams sometimes, dreams of the Cherokee who first made the compact, of the settlers who learned to respect what they didn't understand. My territory has fewer visitors now. Funny how many people decide to change their hiking plans when I mention the tricky terrain in Blackwater Hollow. How many photographers lose interest when I tell them the lighting isn't good for pictures near the burial mounds. Martha knows something changed in me that October. She doesn't ask questions, but sometimes I catch her watching me with worried eyes. My daughters think I'm just getting older, more protective of my forest. They're not wrong. Last month, a group of archaeology students from the university wanted permits to excavate the burial mounds. Their application got lost in the paperwork. Somehow, these things happen now when they need to happen. I've started teaching my replacement, a young ranger named Tommy Clearwater who has Cherokee blood and the wisdom to listen when old stories are told. He doesn't believe the legends yet, but he will. When it's time, I'll make sure he understands what his real job will be, because the compact must continue. The sacred places must be protected, and some secrets are too dangerous to die with the people who keep them. Every few months, I walk the trail to Blackwater Hollow. I check the burial mounds, leave tobacco at the base of the largest one, and listen to the earth breathing beneath my feet. The creature sleeps, but it knows I'm there, knows I'm keeping my promise. Sometimes, in the deep woods where cell phones don't work and GPS signals fail, visitors report strange things. Tall shadows moving between the trees. Sounds like voices speaking in languages that haven't been heard for centuries. Equipment that malfunctions for no reason. They're just stories, I tell them. Mountain folklore. You know how these old-timers love their ghost tales. But at night, when Martha's asleep and the house is quiet, I sit on my porch and look toward the dark ridges where Blackwater Hollow lies hidden. I remember the weight of that creature's hand on my forehead, the burning cold of an ancient promise renewed. And I keep watch. Because some things are older than our understanding, more important than our convenience. Some places demand respect, even from those who don't believe, especially from those who don't believe. My name is Eugene Buckley, and I'm a ranger in the Daniel F. Creek National Forest. I protect 847 square miles of wilderness from people who might harm it. And I protect people from wilderness that might harm them. That's my job now. That's my burden. That's what it means to be a hollow keeper. Y'all keep them lights on and stay close to home. My name is Catherine Thornton, but most folks call me Kate. I've been a forest ranger here in Stone Mountain Wilderness for 11 years now, ever since I graduated from Virginia Tech back in '56. I'm the only woman ranger in this whole district, which means I've had to prove myself every single day since I started. People think being a ranger is just about preventing fires and giving directions to lost hikers. But I'm different. I'm a botanist too. I've discovered 3 new plant species in these mountains, and I've got papers published in real science journals. When universities need someone to find rare plants in Virginia, they call me. That's why I wasn't surprised when Professor Williams from the University of Virginia called me that sweltering July morning in 1968. The thermometer on my cabin porch read 93 degrees, and it wasn't even noon yet. We hadn't seen rain in 6 weeks. "Kate," he said, his voice crackling through the phone, "we need your help with something urgent. There's been a reported sighting of ghost orchids in your area." I nearly dropped the phone. Ghost orchids were supposed to be extinct in Virginia. Finding even one would be the discovery of a lifetime. "Where?" I asked. "Lost Creek Valley. I know it's restricted territory, but this could change everything we know about plant survival in drought conditions." Lost Creek Valley. I felt my stomach tighten. That was the one place my daddy always warned me never to go alone. The one place where his grandmother, my great-grandmother, used to tell stories about the pale ones who lived in hidden places. But I'm an educated woman. I have a master's degree in botany. I don't believe in mountain superstitions. "The flowering period only lasts 3 days," Professor Williams continued. "If we're going to document this, you need to get there tomorrow." After I hung up, I sat on my porch looking out at the mountains. The heat was making everything shimmer like it was underwater. Daddy came out from inside, moving slow on account of his bad hip. "You got that look," he said, settling into his rocking chair. "What's got you thinking so hard?" "Work," I said. "I need to go into Lost Creek Valley." Daddy's face went pale. At 68 years old, he'd lived through the Depression, 2 wars, and the worst drought anyone could remember. But I'd never seen him look scared until that moment. "Katie," he said, using the name he called me when I was little, "that ain't a place for the living." "Daddy, please, not you too." I stood up, frustrated. "You know better. You're an educated man. You taught school for 40 years. Education don't mean you know everything," he said quietly. "My grandmother told me things about that valley, things her grandmother told her." "Stories," I said, "just old mountain stories." But that night, as I packed my gear, plant presses, specimen containers, camping equipment for 3 days, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me from the dark woods beyond my cabin. I told myself it was just nerves, just the heat making me jumpy. I should have listened to Daddy. The next morning, I drove as far as the old logging road would take me, then strapped on my pack and started hiking. The forest felt wrong from the very beginning, but I couldn't put my finger on why. The trees were too green for a drought this severe. There should have been brown leaves, stressed bark, signs that the plants were struggling. Instead, everything looked healthy. Almost too healthy. And it was quiet. No birds singing, no insects buzzing, no squirrels chattering, just my boots crunching on the forest floor and the sound of my own breathing. I checked my compass and frowned. The needle was pointing 15 degrees off where it should be. I tapped it, thinking maybe the heat had affected the mechanism, but it didn't change. By noon, I'd hiked 5 miles into territory that officially didn't exist on any current maps. The old survey maps from the 1922 showed settlements here, but the government records said the area had been abandoned since then. That's when I found the first stone foundation. It was hidden under a thick growth of mountain laurel, but the stones were fitted together too perfectly to be natural. I pushed through the bushes and found myself standing in what had once been someone's front yard. The house was gone, but the foundation was intact. A hand-dug well sat nearby, and when I dropped a pebble into it, I heard it splash. Impossible. Every well for 50 miles was bone dry. I pulled out my camera to document the find, but when I looked through the viewfinder, something moved in the background. Just a flash of white, like someone wearing a pale dress. But when I lowered the camera, nothing was there. I told myself it was just the heat playing tricks on my eyes. I was wrong about that too. I set up my camp in what had once been the settlement's main square. 3 more stone foundations surrounded a central area where the earth was packed hard, like people had walked on it for generations. But according to the official records, no one had lived here for 45 years. As I unpacked my gear, I kept noticing things that didn't make sense. Footprints in the soft earth around the well, bare feet, like someone had been walking there recently. But the prints led to a stone wall and just stopped, like whoever made them had walked straight through solid rock. I took out my field notebook to document everything, but when I tried to write, my pen wouldn't work. The ink was fine that morning, but now it came out in weird watery streaks that didn't look like letters at all. The sun was getting low, casting long shadows between the trees. I decided to explore a bit more before dark, following what looked like an old path deeper into the valley. That's when I heard the voices. At first, I thought it was just wind in the trees, but as I got closer to another ruined building, I could make out actual words. The problem was, I couldn't understand the language. It sounded old-fashioned, with some words that might have been English mixed with something else entirely. I crept closer to what had been a large house, much bigger than the others. The stone foundation was complete, and I could see where rooms had been divided. But it was the voices that made my skin crawl. They were coming from inside the foundation, where there was nothing but empty space and weeds. A woman's voice, soft and sad. A man answering in the same strange language. And underneath it all, the sound of children playing. I grabbed my camera and crept to the edge of the foundation. Through the viewfinder, I could see them. A woman in a long white dress, sitting on what should have been empty air but looked like a porch to her. Her skin was pale olive, and her dark hair was braided down her back. She was beautiful, but there was something about her that made me think of old portraits, like she belonged to another time. A man sat beside her, wearing suspenders and work clothes that looked like they came from the 1920s. 3 children played in the yard that I could see was empty when I wasn't looking through the camera. I pressed the shutter button. The flash went off, and suddenly everything was silent. The woman turned and looked directly at me. Her eyes were the darkest brown I'd ever seen, and when our gazes met, I felt like she was looking right through me to something behind me. She said something in that strange language, and I heard footsteps all around the foundation. Lots of footsteps. But when I spun around, I was still alone. I ran back to my camp as fast as I could, my heart hammering in my chest. That night, I tried to radio for help, but something was wrong with the equipment. Instead of static or the base station, I kept picking up voices speaking that same unfamiliar language. And music, sad, haunting melodies that didn't sound like anything I'd ever heard on the radio. I barely slept. Every time I dozed off, I'd hear footsteps circling my tent. Soft footsteps, like people walking barefoot on the packed earth. When morning came, I found my camera on the picnic table outside my tent. I knew I'd brought it inside with me, but there it was, sitting in the open air. The film counter showed I'd used the whole roll, but I only remembered taking 3 pictures. I should have packed up and left right then. Instead, I decided to look for the orchids. That's what I'd come here for, after all. I was a scientist. I had a job to do. I followed what looked like an old garden path behind the largest foundation. The plants here were incredible, species that shouldn't grow together, flowers that shouldn't bloom in this season. And there, growing in a spot where the morning light filtered through the trees just right, I found them. Ghost orchids, dozens of them. They were even more beautiful than I'd imagined, their white petals almost glowing in the dim forest light. I'd found the discovery of a lifetime. But as I knelt down to examine them closer, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. They were growing in a perfect circle around what looked like a grave. And carved into the simple stone marker, in letters so worn I could barely read them, was a name, Mahala Gibson, born 1878, murdered 1923. The orchids weren't just growing randomly. They were planted there, tended, cared for, by someone who should have been dead for 45 years. That's when I heard the woman's voice again, right behind me. "You came back," she said in perfect English, just like she said you would. I turned around slowly, my hands shaking as I gripped my camera. The woman from the day before stood about 10 feet away. But now I could see her clearly without the camera. She was tall, taller than most women I knew, with that distinctive olive skin and those impossibly dark eyes. Her dress was white cotton, handmade, with the kind of careful stitching that took hours. It was clean and pressed, like she'd just put it on, but the style was from the 1920s. "Don't be afraid," she said, but her voice had an accent I couldn't place. "We've been waiting for you." "Who are you?" I managed to ask. "I am Mahala Gibson. This is my grave you're kneeling beside." She gestured to the stone marker. And you are Catherine Minerva Thornton, daughter of Ezekiel, granddaughter of Mary, great-granddaughter of Celia. I stared at her. No one outside my family knew my full middle name, and my great-grandmother Celia had died when I was 5 years old. How do you know that? Because Celia was my cousin. Because you have Melungeon blood, child, whether you claim it or not. Melungeon. I felt like I'd been slapped. That was the word people whispered about my great-grandmother. The word that had made my daddy so ashamed of his heritage that he'd tried to pass for white his whole life. That's just an old mountain story, I said, but my voice sounded weak even to me. Mahala laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. Child, you're standing in a valley full of old mountain stories. Stories that were true when your great-grandmother was alive and are still true now. She gestured around us, and suddenly I could see them everywhere. People working in gardens that existed 45 years ago. Children playing games in yards that were now grown over with weeds. Men repairing tools, women hanging laundry, all of them moving through their daily lives as if nothing had changed. We are the lost ones, Mahala said. The ones who were driven from our homes, murdered for our land, buried without proper rites. We cannot rest until our story is told. I blinked hard, and suddenly they were all gone again. Just me and Mahala, standing in the overgrown ruins. This isn't real, I whispered. Real enough, she said. Real enough that you can't leave until you understand. I tried to back away, but my feet felt heavy, like I was walking through mud. I need to go. I need to get back. You need to see, Mahala said. You need to know what happened to us. The air around me started to shimmer, like heat rising off pavement. And suddenly, I wasn't standing in 1968 anymore. The valley was alive with people. The houses were complete, with wooden walls and tin roofs. Gardens flourished everywhere, and the air was full of the sounds of a working community. Hammers ringing on anvils, children laughing, women calling to each other as they worked. These were the Melungeon people. My people, whether I wanted to claim them or not. They were beautiful, all of them. Tall and strong, with that distinctive olive skin and dark hair. Some had eyes so light they were almost silver. Others had eyes so dark they looked black. They moved with a grace that spoke of generations of hard work and pride. I watched a young woman who looked like she could have been my sister teaching children to identify medicinal plants. An old man carved intricate patterns into a piece of wood while telling stories that made everyone around him laugh. Families worked together in their gardens, growing food I'd never seen before, Mediterranean vegetables that shouldn't have survived in these mountains. We lived here for 150 years, Mahala's voice said in my ear, though I couldn't see her in this vision of the past. We minded our own business, farmed our land, raised our children. We never bothered anyone. But as I watched, the scene began to change. The laughter died down. People started looking over their shoulders, talking in worried whispers. Men arrived in the valley. White men in expensive suits, with faces hard as stone. They carried official-looking papers and were followed by other men with guns. Coal company, Mahala's voice continued, found minerals under our land, wanted us gone. I watched the negotiations. The Melungeon elders, led by a younger Mahala, showing the white men their legal deeds, papers dating back to the 1700s, signed by colonial governors. The land was theirs, fair and square. The coal company men didn't care. What happened next made me sick to my stomach. It was past midnight when they came. Not just the coal company men, but local thugs they'd hired. They set fire to the houses while people slept, shot anyone who tried to escape. I watched families torn apart, children crying for parents who would never answer. I saw Mahala herself try to lead the children to safety up the mountainside, only to be cut down by gunfire just yards from the tree line. The massacre lasted 3 hours. When it was over, 47 people were dead. The men dug a mass grave behind the largest house and threw the bodies in without ceremony. No proper burial, no prayers, no marker. They destroyed the deeds and official records, then went back to town and told everyone the Melungeons had packed up and moved west. The vision faded, and I was back in 1968, alone with Mahala's spirit in the overgrown ruins. I was crying. I couldn't help it. Now you know, she said gently. Now you understand why we cannot rest. What do you want from me? I asked. Justice. Truth. Recognition. She pointed to the mass grave. Our bones have been in unhallowed ground for 45 years. Our children's spirits cannot find peace. Our story has been erased from history. But I'm just a forest ranger. I study plants. I can't. You can. Mahala's voice was firm now. You have our blood. You have education. You have access to the outside world. You can tell our story. And if I don't? Mahala's expression grew sad. Then you'll stay here with us, forever. The living and the dead, together in this valley, until someone else with the gift comes to take your place. I felt the truth of her words in my bones. This place had power, old power that ran deeper than anything I'd learned in school. And I was connected to it, whether I wanted to be or not. How? I whispered. First, you must help us perform the proper burial rites. Then you must take evidence to the outside world, proof of what happened here. What evidence? Mahala smiled for the first time since I'd met her. Oh, child. These coal company men thought they were so clever, but they kept records of everything they did. And those records are still here. Mahala led me through the ruins to what had once been the coal company's temporary office. Hidden beneath a false stone floor, we found a metal strongbox that had somehow survived 45 years of weather. Inside were documents that made my hands shake as I read them. Contracts with the hired killers. Maps showing exactly where the mass grave was located. Even photographs of the aftermath, taken as proof that the job was complete. They kept evidence of their own crimes, I said, hardly believing it. Evil men are often stupid men, Mahala replied. They thought no one would ever find this valley again. But as I sorted through the papers by flashlight, I heard something that made my blood freeze. Voices. Angry voices. And they were getting closer. They know you're here? Mahala said urgently. The spirits of the men who killed us. They've been bound to this place too, trapped by their own guilt and cruelty. They won't let you take this evidence. I looked up from the documents to see shapes moving through the trees. Men in 1,920 seconds, clothing. But their faces were twisted with rage and hatred. They carried guns that gleamed with supernatural light. Can they hurt me? I asked. They can kill you, Mahala said. And if you die here, you'll be trapped with all of us. I stuffed the documents into my backpack, my heart racing. How do I get out? First, you must help us complete the burial ritual. It's the only way to break their power over this place. She led me to the mass grave behind the largest foundation. Other spirits had gathered there, all 47 victims of the massacre. Men, women, children, grandparents. They stood in a circle around the unmarked ground, their faces solemn. Do you know the old words? Mahala asked. I thought of my great-grandmother Celia, the woman my father had been so ashamed of. But suddenly I remembered things she'd taught me when I was little. Words in that strange language I'd been hearing. Prayers and rituals she'd made me memorize, even though my parents disapproved. I remember some of it, I said. That will have to be enough. As I knelt by the grave and began to speak the half-remembered words, something incredible happened. The spirits of the murder victims began to glow with soft, white light. Peace settled over their faces for the first time in 45 years. But the killer's spirits weren't going to let this happen without a fight. They emerged from the forest like a nightmare, screaming curses in English and other languages. Their ghostly bullets couldn't hurt me directly, but they shattered trees around me, sending splinters flying. Keep going, Mahala shouted over the chaos. Don't stop the ritual. I continued chanting, even as dead branches crashed down around me. The words came easier now, like my great-grandmother was speaking through me. I understood what I was saying, prayers for the dead, blessings for their journey to the afterlife, curses on those who had harmed the innocent. The light around the Melungeon spirits grew brighter. One by one, they began to fade away, finally free to move on to whatever came after death. But as they disappeared, the killer spirits became more desperate, more violent. The largest of them, a man with a coal company badge on his shirt, materialized directly in front of me. His ghostly hands reached for my throat. You don't belong here, he screamed. This land belongs to us. That's when I understood something crucial. I did belong here. This was my ancestral land, my people's place. And I had every right to reclaim it. No, I said, standing up and meeting his ghostly glare. This land belongs to them, and to their descendants, to me. I spoke the final words of the burial prayer in a voice that didn't sound like my own. It was stronger, older, carrying the authority of generations. The killer spirits let out a collective howl of rage and vanished like smoke in the wind. Mahala was the last to go. As the dawn light began filtering through the trees, she looked at me with gratitude and something like pride. "Thank you," she said simply. "Now take our story to the world. Make sure we're remembered." "I will," I promised. "And Kate," she was already starting to fade, "be proud of who you are. Your great-grandmother would be." Then she was gone, and I was alone in the ruins with a backpack full of evidence and a head full of memories I'd carry for the rest of my life. It took me 6 hours to hike out of Lost Creek Valley. My radio started working again as soon as I cleared the ridgeline, and I called for backup to help me document the gravesite properly. The official investigation took 3 months. The documents I'd found were authenticated by historians at 3 different universities. The mass grave was excavated with all the dignity and care the victims had been denied in 1923. The coal company no longer existed, but their legal successors were forced to pay damages to the descendants of the murdered families. The land was officially returned to the Melungeon community, and a proper memorial was erected in the valley. I submitted my report about the ghost orchids to Professor Williams, but I never told him how I'd really found them. Some truths are too strange for academic journals. My career took some hits, though. Other rangers started calling me unreliable because I'd begun reporting on other supernatural sights I encountered in the mountains. I was passed over for promotions, reassigned to less important territories. I didn't care. I'd found something more valuable than career advancement. I'd found my heritage, my identity, my connection to something larger than myself. My father and I had long talks after I returned from Lost Creek Valley. He told me stories about our family that he'd kept hidden for 60 years, ashamed of what he thought made us different. Now he seemed proud to share them. I learned our traditional crafts, our old songs, our herbal remedies. I became an expert on Melungeon history and culture, writing papers and giving lectures about a people who had almost been forgotten, and sometimes, late at night when I'm alone in the mountains, I can still sense them. Other spirits, other stories waiting to be told. Other injustices demanding recognition. I'm not the same woman who hiked into Lost Creek Valley that July morning in 1968. I'm someone who understands that there are more things in these ancient mountains than any university ever taught me. Someone who knows that science and spirit don't have to be enemies. Someone who learned that the most important discoveries aren't always the ones you can press between the pages of a book. The ghost orchids still bloom in Lost Creek Valley every July, tended now by living hands and remembered love. Visitors come from all over the world to see them and to read the memorial to the 47 souls who died for their land. But I haven't been back. I don't need to. I carry their stories with me wherever I go. And sometimes, on quiet evenings, when the mountain mist is rising, I swear I can hear Mahala's voice on the wind, thanking me for keeping my promise, for making sure they're remembered, for bringing them home. My name is Rebecca Rose Fairchild, but everyone calls me Becky. I've been a park ranger in the Great Smoky Mountains for 16 years now, and I've seen things that would make most people pack up and move to the city. But what happened on Halloween night in 1987 changed everything I thought I knew about the world. I started working for the National Park Service when I was 19, right out of high school. While other girls my age were getting married and having babies, I was learning wilderness medicine and technical climbing. The mountains called to me in a way I couldn't explain. My great-grandmother used to say I had mountain blood, but I never paid much attention to her old stories. Great-grandmother Atsila died when I was 17. She used to try to teach me about plants and healing, but I was too busy studying for my EMT certification to listen. I wanted to be a real doctor, not some old mountain woman mixing up weeds and mumbling prayers. Modern medicine was the future, not those dusty old superstitions. By 1987, I had become the only ranger certified for high-altitude technical rescues in our section of the park. I covered over 1,000 square miles of wilderness, from the tourist trails down low to the remote peaks where hardly anyone ever went. Up there, above 4,500 feet, your radio doesn't work and helicopters can't fly if the weather turns bad. When something goes wrong in that country, you're on your own. The Cataract Falls area was my specialty. It's a tough place to reach. 18 miles from the nearest trail, requiring technical climbing gear and at least 2 days of hiking. Most people never see it. The few who make it up there find waterfalls that seem to pour out of solid rock and caves that go back into the mountain farther than anyone has ever explored. What most visitors don't know is that the high country is full of Cherokee sacred sites. Burial caves, medicine springs, ceremonial grounds. The Cherokee people lived in these mountains for thousands of years before the government forced them out in 1838. Some families hid in the most remote areas and never left. My great-grandmother was one of their descendants, though she never talked much about it. October in the mountains is beautiful but dangerous. The weather can change from sunny and warm to snowing and freezing in just a few hours. That particular October had been colder than usual. By the end of the month, we were getting our first real snowfall of the season, and the temperature was dropping into the 20s at night. I remember that Halloween morning clearly. I was checking my equipment at the ranger station when the radio crackled to life. A research team from the university hadn't checked in when they were supposed to. 4 graduate students, led by Dr. James Morrison, an ethnobotanist studying Cherokee plant medicine. They were supposed to radio in every evening at 6 o'clock, but we hadn't heard from them in 2 days. The last known location was the Cataract Falls area, near some old Cherokee burial caves. Dr. Morrison had the proper permits to conduct his research, but something in my gut told me this wasn't going to be a simple rescue. The weather report was calling for a major storm system to move in that night, which would make helicopter evacuation impossible for at least 3 days. I packed my gear carefully. Advanced first aid supplies, trauma equipment, emergency medications, technical climbing hardware, and enough food for a week. My medical training had taught me to prepare for anything, but as I loaded my backpack that morning, I kept thinking about something my great-grandmother used to say. Some knowledge can only be learned when you're ready to lose everything you thought you knew. The hike up to Cataract Falls normally takes me about 6 hours, but with the snow starting to fall and my heavy pack, it would be closer to 8. I started up the trail as the first flakes began to drift down through the trees, thinking this would be just another rescue mission. I had no idea I was walking toward a confrontation with powers I'd spent my whole adult life denying existed. The first sign that something was wrong came about halfway up the mountain. I was following Hazel Creek when I noticed the plants. It was late October, almost November, but I was seeing spring flowers blooming in the snow. Trout lilies and bloodroot, plants that should have been dead and buried until March. Not just a few scattered blooms, but whole patches of them, glowing white and yellow against the dark mountain soil. I stopped and knelt down to examine them more closely. The flowers were real enough. I could smell their sweet scent and feel their delicate petals. But this was impossible. These plants had specific growing seasons, and no amount of climate change could explain spring flowers blooming in a snowstorm. My scientific training kicked in. Maybe the research team had brought seeds with them for some kind of experiment. But as I looked closer, I could see that these weren't newly planted. The root systems were deep and old, like they'd been growing here for years. I radioed back to headquarters to report the strange plant growth, but all I got was static. That was normal, this high up, so I made a note in my log and kept climbing. But the feeling that something was off kept growing stronger. The next weird thing was the animals. Every woodland creature I encountered seemed to be carrying something in its mouth. A squirrel ran past me with a mouthful of what looked like ginseng root. A raccoon family was gathering what I could swear was golden seal. Even the birds were acting strange, flying in patterns I'd never seen before, like they were performing some kind of ceremony. When I reached about 4,800 feet, my equipment started acting up. My digital thermometer was giving readings that made no sense. 85 degrees 1 minute, 32 degrees the next, sometimes changing even as I watched. My compass needle spun wildly instead of pointing north. Even my watch seemed to be running slow. I tried to radio headquarters again and got something I'll never forget as long as I live. Instead of static or silence, I heard singing. Soft, melodic voices chanting in a language I didn't recognize but somehow felt familiar. The singing seemed to be coming from somewhere ahead of me, higher up the mountain, but there was no way anyone else could be up there in this weather. The trail to Cataract Falls gets really steep in the last 2 miles. You're basically rock climbing with a pack on your back, following ancient handholds carved into the stone. The Cherokee used this route for centuries to reach their sacred sites. As I climbed higher, the singing got clearer, and I started to make out individual words. Unalan Vigadohi, the voices chanted over and over. I had no idea what it meant, but hearing it made my skin crawl and my heart race at the same time. It was beautiful and terrifying. By the time I reached the top of the falls, the snow was coming down hard. The waterfall itself was acting strange. Instead of flowing in its normal pattern, the water seemed to be forming shapes as it fell. Spirals and symbols that reminded me of the Cherokee pottery my great-grandmother used to make. I found the research team's base camp about 50 yards from the falls, in a small clearing surrounded by massive old trees. 4 bright orange tents set up in a perfect square, with a cold fire pit in the center. But what caught my attention immediately was how quiet everything was. No voices, no movement, nothing but the sound of falling water and that strange singing that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Hello," I called out. "Dr. Morrison, this is Ranger Fairchild." A weak voice answered from one of the tents. "Help us," it said, barely loud enough to hear over the wind. "Please, help us." I dropped my pack and ran to the tent where the voice had come from. Inside, I found Dr. Morrison lying in his sleeping bag, burning up with fever. His face was flushed red, and sweat was pouring off him despite the cold air. When he saw me, he grabbed my wrist with surprising strength. "They're angry," he whispered, his eyes wide and frightened. "We didn't know. We didn't mean to disturb them." "Who's angry?" I asked, pulling out my medical supplies. "Dr. Morrison, I need you to tell me what happened." But instead of answering in English, he started speaking in that same musical language I'd been hearing on the radio. Words flowed out of him like water, and even though I didn't understand what he was saying, I felt like I should. I checked the other 3 tents and found the same thing. All 4 researchers burning up with fever, all speaking in tongues, all terrified of something they couldn't or wouldn't explain in English. Their symptoms didn't match any disease I'd ever studied. High fever, but clear eyes, rapid pulse, but steady breathing, and that strange linguistic ability that made no medical sense. As I was taking their vital signs, one of the graduate students, a young woman named Sarah, sat up and looked directly at me. "Atzila's granddaughter," she said clearly in English. "You've come home." The hair on the back of my neck stood up. Atzila was my great-grandmother's Cherokee name. No one at the university would have known that. No one except family even knew my great-grandmother existed. "How do you know that name?" I demanded. But Sarah just smiled and lay back down, returning to the melodic chanting that seemed to echo off the mountains themselves. I set up my own tent as far from the research camp as I could, while still being able to monitor my patients. Something was very wrong here, and my medical training wasn't giving me any answers. The fever readings I was getting were impossible, temperatures that should have killed them, but they were conscious and talking, well, chanting anyway. As darkness fell, the situation got worse. The strange singing I'd been hearing grew louder and seemed to come from multiple directions. My remaining working instruments, the few that hadn't gone completely haywire, were picking up sounds and readings that shouldn't exist. Around 9 o'clock, I was checking on Dr. Morrison when he grabbed my arm again. This time, when he spoke, it was in perfect English, but it wasn't his voice. It was an old woman's voice, speaking through his mouth. "Rebecca Rose," the voice said. "Your great-grandmother sends her greetings." I jerked my hand away so fast I nearly fell over backward. "That's impossible. You're hallucinating from the fever." But the voice continued, calm and patient. "She tried to teach you when you were small. About the plants that heal, the spirits that guide, the blood that remembers. You chose the white man's medicine instead." "Stop it," I said, my voice shaking. "You don't know anything about my family." Dr. Morrison's eyes rolled back until only the whites showed, but the old woman's voice kept coming. "The golden seal grows by the lightning-struck oak, the bloodroot hides under the gray stone. The ginseng waits where the bear has walked. She taught you these things, but you forgot." I ran out of the tent and straight into the worst snowstorm I'd ever seen in October. The wind was howling through the trees, but underneath it, I could still hear that singing. Only now it wasn't just voices. I could hear drums, deep and rhythmic, coming from somewhere in the forest. I tried my radio again, desperately hoping to get through to headquarters, but instead of static, I heard my great-grandmother's voice, clear as day. Little Sparrow, she said, using the pet name she'd called me as a child. You cannot heal them with your white medicine. Their sickness comes from the spirit world. I threw the radio down in the snow. This was impossible. Great-grandmother had been dead for 15 years. People don't talk to you through radio static. Fever patients don't speak in ancient languages they don't know. Spring flowers don't bloom in snowstorms. But as I stood there in the whipping wind, trying to convince myself I was having some kind of breakdown, I saw her. She was standing at the edge of the clearing, wearing the same faded blue dress she'd worn every day I'd known her. Her long gray hair hung loose around her shoulders, and her dark eyes looked at me with the same mixture of love and disappointment I remembered from childhood. Great-grandmother? I whispered. She nodded and beckoned for me to follow her. Against every logical thought in my head, I found myself walking toward the forest. The snow and wind seemed to part around her as she led me deeper into the woods, toward a rocky outcropping I hadn't noticed before. Hidden behind a curtain of hanging vines was the entrance to a cave. Not just any cave. I could see that the opening had been carved and shaped by human hands. Cherokee hands, centuries ago. Ancient symbols were etched into the stone around the entrance, symbols that seemed to pulse with their own light in the darkness. This is where they camped? My great-grandmother said, pointing to the cave entrance. Right on top of our ancestors' burial place. The spirits are angry because the white man came to steal our medicine secrets. But I'm not Cherokee, I protested. I'm just a park ranger. I can't help with spirits. She looked at me with those patient eyes. Your blood is Cherokee. Your grandmother's grandmother was a medicine woman, and her grandmother before her. The knowledge sleeps in your blood, waiting for you to remember. I don't believe in any of this, I said, but even as the words left my mouth, I wasn't sure they were true anymore. Then believe in your patients, she said. They are dying, little sparrow, not from any sickness your white medicine can cure, but from spiritual poison. Only Cherokee medicine can save them now. As if to emphasize her point, a scream came from the direction of the camp. I ran back through the trees, leaving the ghost of my great-grandmother behind, and found Sarah convulsing in her tent. Her temperature had spiked to 108 degrees, and she was speaking that strange language faster and faster, like she was running out of time. I gave her everything in my medical kit that might help. Fever reducers, anti-inflammatories, electrolyte solutions, but nothing worked. If anything, she got worse. Her skin became hot enough to burn, and when she looked at me, her eyes had changed color. Instead of blue, they were now deep brown, almost black. You must choose, she said in that old woman's voice. Save them with the old ways, or watch them die with the new. One by one, the other researchers began convulsing too. Dr. Morrison started speaking what sounded like prophecies, describing Cherokee villages and people who had been dead for over a century. Another student, Mark, began drawing symbols in the dirt with his finger, complex patterns that looked like the carvings I'd seen on the cave. I had to face the impossible truth. Whatever was happening here was beyond anything I'd learned in medical school. These people were going to die unless I did something completely against my training, my beliefs, and my understanding of reality. I had to choose between the medicine I'd trusted my whole career and the heritage I'd spent my life rejecting. As the wind howled around our camp and the spirits of my ancestors sang in the darkness, I realized that my great-grandmother had been trying to prepare me for this moment my entire life. At midnight on Halloween night, as the Cherokee singing reached a crescendo that seemed to make the mountains themselves vibrate, I made my choice. I couldn't watch these people die while I clung to my stubborn refusal to believe in something bigger than what I'd learned in textbooks. I followed the pull I felt toward the burial cave, carrying my medical bag and a flashlight that flickered strangely in the supernatural atmosphere. The entrance to the cave was exactly where I'd seen it with my great-grandmother, though I'd half convinced myself I'd imagined the whole encounter. Inside, the cave opened into a large chamber carved with Cherokee symbols and paintings that seemed to move in my flashlight beam. At the center of the chamber was a circle of stones surrounding a natural spring that bubbled up from deep underground. The water was crystal clear and warm, despite the freezing air outside. But what took my breath away were the Cherokee people standing around the spring. There were dozens of them, men and women of all ages, wearing traditional clothing from different time periods. Some looked like they were from the 1800s, others much older. They were translucent, like looking through colored glass, but they were definitely there. I could see their expressions, hear their quiet conversations, smell the sage and sweetgrass that seemed to surround them. My great-grandmother stepped forward from the group and spoke to me in Cherokee. Somehow, I understood every word. "Welcome home, little sparrow. You have finally come to learn what your blood has always known." "I don't know how to help them," I said, surprised that I was speaking Cherokee back to her. "I only know white man's medicine." "We will teach you," she said. "But first, you must accept who you are." The other spirits began to move around the chamber, and I realized they were preparing for a ceremony. Some gathered plants that grew around the spring, plants I recognized as powerful healing herbs, but growing in impossible abundance. Others arranged stones and lit a fire that burned without fuel, filling the cave with sweet smoke. "Your patience disturbed our burial place, seeking to steal our knowledge," my great-grandmother explained. "The spirits of the wronged dead have poisoned them with the sickness of greed. Only a true Cherokee healer can remove this poison." "But I'm not a healer," I protested. "I'm just a park ranger." "You are Atzila's great-granddaughter. You are the daughter of medicine, women stretching back 20 generations. The knowledge is in your blood, sleeping, waiting for you to wake it up." She led me to the spring and instructed me to place my hands in the warm water. The moment my skin touched the surface, I felt something electric shoot up my arms and spread through my entire body. Images flooded my mind. Generations of Cherokee women gathering plants, mixing medicines, performing healing ceremonies. I saw my great-grandmother as a young woman, secretly treating sick children when the white doctors had given up hope. "The plant spirits will guide you," she said. "Listen with your heart, not your head." Suddenly, I could feel the plants around the spring, like they were living beings with personalities and voices. The golden seal hummed with power against infection. The bloodroot whispered about drawing poison from the body. The ginseng radiated strength and balance. Each plant was eager to help, waiting for someone who could hear their offerings. Working with my ancestors' guidance, I gathered specific plants in precise amounts. But this wasn't just about the physical herbs. Each plant had to be approached with respect, asked for its help, thanked for its sacrifice. The spirits showed me how to prepare them, how to combine them, how to infuse them with intention and prayer. When the medicine was ready, I carried it back to the camp. The researchers were worse than ever. Sarah had stopped responding entirely, and Dr. Morrison was burning up with fever while speaking in the voices of Cherokee ancestors who had died over 100 years ago. Following my great-grandmother's instructions, I administered the plant medicine not just as drugs, but as part of a healing ceremony. I sang songs I'd never learned, drew symbols I'd never seen, called on spirits I'd never believed in. With each patient I treated, I felt the power flowing through me more strongly. The change was immediate and dramatic. The fever broke, the convulsions stopped, and one by one, the researchers fell into peaceful, natural sleep. As the sun rose over the mountains, Dr. Morrison opened his eyes and looked at me with clear recognition. "Ranger Fairchild?" he said weakly. "How did you find us? What happened?" I looked around the cave where we'd spent the night and realized the Cherokee spirits were gone. The healing plants had withered to normal autumn decay. Even the symbols on the walls looked like ordinary rock formations in the morning light. "You had altitude sickness," I lied smoothly. "Combined with exposure and dehydration, I treated you with standard wilderness medicine." But as I helped them pack up their camp to leave, Dr. Morrison pulled me aside. "I remember fragments," he said quietly. "Old voices, ancient ceremonies. And you were different last night. You knew things, did things that aren't in any medical textbook." I met his eyes and saw that some part of him understood what had really happened, even if he couldn't fully believe it. "The mountains hold old knowledge," I said finally. "Sometimes, in emergencies, that knowledge finds a way to help." The helicopter evacuation went smoothly once the weather cleared. Dr. Morrison and his team were taken to the hospital in Knoxville for observation, but they were pronounced completely healthy after a thorough examination. The official report listed their condition as a combination of altitude sickness, dehydration, and mild hypothermia, all of which I had successfully treated using advanced wilderness medicine techniques. No one mentioned the Cherokee voices, the impossible plant growth, or the spirits I'd seen in the burial cave. No one asked how I'd managed to treat 4 critically ill patients by myself with limited supplies in the middle of a snowstorm. The report was filed, The case was closed, and everyone moved on. Everyone except me. In the weeks that followed, I found myself drawn back to the high country again and again. I began studying the Cherokee language seriously for the first time, learning to read and speak the words my great-grandmother had tried to teach me as a child. I researched traditional plant medicine, not just the scientific properties of the herbs, but their spiritual uses as well. Most importantly, I started listening to the land in a way I never had before. The mountains began to feel different to me. Where I used to see just trees and rocks and wildlife, I now sensed the presence of something older and deeper. The springs seemed to whisper with hidden knowledge. The plants grew in patterns that told stories. The wind carried messages from voices that had been silenced long ago but never truly forgotten. Dr. Morrison published his research on Cherokee plant medicine 6 months later. It became a groundbreaking paper that helped legitimize traditional healing methods in academic circles. He credited our encounter in the mountains as his inspiration, though he never mentioned the supernatural aspects of what had happened. I think some part of him knew the truth but couldn't quite bring himself to believe it. I continued my work as a park ranger, but my approach to wilderness medicine changed completely. I began incorporating traditional plant knowledge into my emergency treatments, always as a supplement to modern medicine, never as a replacement. The results were remarkable. Injuries healed faster, infections cleared up without antibiotics, and patients often reported feeling not just physically better, but spiritually renewed. Other rangers started asking me for advice about treating visitors with plant allergies, altitude sickness, and exposure. I found myself becoming an unofficial expert on alternative wilderness medicine, though I was careful never to claim anything that couldn't be backed up by science. The Cherokee Nation took notice of my work and invited me to participate in their cultural preservation programs. They were working to document and protect traditional knowledge that had almost been lost, and they needed people who understood both the old ways and the new ones. Through this work, I learned that what happened to me that Halloween night wasn't unique. There were other places in the mountains where the spirit world touched the physical world, other situations where traditional healing succeeded where modern medicine failed. I became part of a quiet network of people, doctors, nurses, rangers, and tribal elders, who worked to preserve and protect these ancient ways of healing. But perhaps the most important change was personal. I finally understood what my great-grandmother had been trying to tell me all those years ago. The knowledge in my blood hadn't made me less of a medical professional, it had made me a more complete one. I was no longer just treating symptoms, I was helping to heal the whole person, body and spirit together. Every time I return to the high country now, I can feel my ancestors' presence. They don't appear to me as visibly as they did that night, but they're there, guiding my hands as I gather medicines, whispering advice when I encounter difficult cases, reminding me that some kinds of healing require more than just scientific knowledge. The mountains still hold their secrets, and the spirits still guard their sacred places. But now I'm not just a visitor in their domain. I'm family, carrying on a tradition that stretches back centuries and forward into a future where the old ways and the new ones can work together. Sometimes, late at night when the wind is right, I can still hear my great-grandmother's voice singing the old healing songs. And sometimes, just sometimes, I sing along. Rebecca, Becky, Rose Fairchild continued her career with the National Park Service until her retirement in 2003. She now works as a consultant on traditional healing methods and serves on the advisory board for the Cherokee Nation's Cultural Preservation Initiative. The Cataract Falls area remains one of the most remote and protected sections of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. My name is Jefferson McLeod, and I've been a forest ranger for 13 years. Most folks call me Jeff. What I'm about to tell you happened in August of 1974, deep in the Cherokee National Forest in Tennessee. I wish I could say it was just a bad dream, but the scars on my hands tell a different story. I come from moonshine people. 5 generations of my family made illegal whiskey in these mountains. My great-great-grandfather started our first, still back in 1847. And every McLeod man since then kept the tradition alive. Every man except me. When I was 24, I put on a ranger's uniform and swore to uphold the law. That meant shutting down the very stills my own blood had been running for over a century. My family never forgave me for it. At Christmas dinner, there's always an empty chair where I used to sit. My own Uncle Silas spits on the ground when he sees me coming. People think I'm crazy for taking this job. They say, "Jeff, why would you hunt your own kin?" The truth is simple. I believe in right and wrong. I believe in the law. And I never believed in the old stories about something protecting the stills. Something my family called the still devil. "Ain't no devil gonna keep me from doing my job," I used to say. Just mountain superstition. Lord, how wrong I was. The Cherokee National Forest covers 890 square miles of the roughest country God ever made. Most of it is so wild that if you get lost, you might never find your way out. There are places where my radio won't work, where the trees grow so thick that noon looks like twilight, and where the old families still run their stills like their grandfathers did. One place has a name that should have warned me off: Hellfire Hollow. It sits high up in the mountains, about 3,000 feet above sea level. You can only get there by following deer trails that most people don't even know exist. The McLeod family has been using that hollow for moonshine since before the Civil War. August of '74 was the hottest summer anyone could remember. We hadn't seen rain in 8 weeks. The temperature hit 100 degrees day after day, and the whole forest was dry as kindling. Every ranger in Tennessee was on high alert for fires. One spark could burn down half the mountain. That's when everything started going wrong. It began on August 28th, a Wednesday morning so hot you could barely breathe. I was sitting in my truck at the ranger station, going over fire reports, when the radio crackled to life. "Unit 7, this is base. We've got a report of smoke in Sector 12, possible wildfire near Hellfire Hollow." My heart sank. Sector 12 was McLeod territory. "Copy, base. I'm headed out now. Jeff, be careful out there. We also have a problem. 2 ATF agents went missing yesterday. Last radio contact was near that same area." ATF agents. The federal boys who hunt moonshiners for a living. If they were missing in my family's territory, it could only mean trouble. Big trouble. I drove my truck as far up the mountain as the roads would take me, then started hiking. The air smelled like smoke and something else, something sweet that reminded me of corn mash. As I climbed higher, that smell got stronger. When I reached the ridge overlooking Hellfire Hollow, I stopped dead in my tracks. There was a fire, all right, but it wasn't burning like any fire I'd ever seen. The flames were dancing in a perfect circle around something in the center of the hollow, and in the middle of that circle, untouched by the fire, stood an old copper still. My family's still, but that wasn't the strangest part. The strangest part was that animals were gathering near the fire instead of running away. Deer, rabbits, even a black bear, all of them standing calm as you please, watching those flames like they were hypnotized. I radioed for backup, but all I got was static. My compass started spinning like a child's toy, and the temperature gauge on my equipment was jumping between 100 degrees and 40 degrees, back and forth like it couldn't make up its mind. That's when I heard the music. Bluegrass music, coming from somewhere down in the hollow, an old song my grandfather used to play on his fiddle, Devil's Dream. But there shouldn't have been anyone down there. The fire should have driven everyone away. I started down the slope, and that's when I found the first sign that something was terribly wrong. There, pressed deep into the mud beside a creek, was a footprint. It was shaped like a man's foot, but it was nearly 2 feet long, and the mud around it was baked hard as pottery, like someone had stepped there while their foot was on fire. I'd been a ranger for 13 years. I'd tracked everything from lost hikers to escaped convicts, but I'd never seen anything like that footprint, and I was about to see a lot worse. I followed that creek downstream for maybe a quarter mile before I found the ATF agent's vehicle. It was a black government sedan, flipped upside down in the creek bed. But there were no skid marks on the road above, no broken guardrail, no sign of how it got there. The car looked like a giant hand had picked it up and dropped it. Both doors were open, and water was flowing right through the cab. But the agents weren't inside. Their weapons were still there, 2 service pistols and a shotgun, all loaded and ready. Their radios were there too, crackling with static. What made my skin crawl was what I found next to the car. 2 pairs of dress shoes, set side by side on a flat rock like someone had placed them there on purpose. Each shoe was filled to the brim with clear liquid that smelled like the finest moonshine I'd ever encountered. And beside the shoes were 2 sets of clothes, folded neat as you please, but no bodies, no blood, no signs of a struggle. I picked up one of the radios and tried to call it in. "Base, this is Unit 7. I've found the federal vehicle. Agents are missing, but I need backup up here right now." All I got was that bluegrass music, playing through the radio speaker like it was a regular station. Devil's Dream, over and over again. I tried to start my truck. The engine turned over once, then died. Tried again. Nothing. The battery was fine. The gas tank was full, but that truck wouldn't start. Something didn't want me to leave. I decided to search for the agents on foot. Maybe they'd been thrown from the car and were lying hurt somewhere in the woods. I called their names as I searched, but the only answer was the echo of my own voice bouncing off the mountains. That's when I started noticing other things wrong with the forest. The trees near the still were scorched black, but they weren't burned up. They were still alive, still green underneath the char. It was like something had painted them with fire but hadn't wanted to kill them. The air itself felt wrong. In some spots, it was so hot it hurt to breathe. In others, it was cold enough that I could see my breath. And that sweet smell was getting stronger. Corn mash and alcohol and something else, something that reminded me of sulfur. I was maybe 50 yards from the still when I heard the voices. 2 men, talking in low, frightened whispers. I moved closer, staying behind the trees, until I could see them. It was the missing ATF agents. They were alive, but they were tied to trees with what looked like copper wire. Both men were in their underwear, shivering despite the heat. One of them, a young guy with red hair, was crying. The other one, older and tougher looking, was trying to keep his partner calm. "It's going to be okay, Patterson," the older agent said. "Someone will find us." "Did you see it, Rodriguez?" the young one whispered. "Did you see that thing? Just stay calm. Don't think about it. It wasn't human. God help us, it wasn't human." I was about to step out and help them when I heard footsteps behind me. Heavy footsteps, like someone wearing boots made of iron. I turned around and saw my Uncle Silas walking through the trees. He was carrying an old hunting rifle and wearing the same overalls he'd worn every day for the past 20 years. But something was different about him. His eyes looked scared. "You shouldn't be here, Jeff," he said. "Uncle Silas, thank God. We need to get those federal boys untied and No." His voice was firm. "You don't understand what's happening here. What I understand is that 2 federal agents are tied to trees and need help." Uncle Silas looked toward the still, then back at me. "You never believed the old stories, did you? About the thing that protects our family. There's no devil protecting your moonshine, Uncle Silas. Just superstition." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Superstition? Boy, our family made a deal back in 1847, protection for our stills in exchange for payment. Every few years, we have to give it something." "What kind of payment?" Before he could answer, the temperature dropped 20 degrees in about 5 seconds. My breath came out in white puffs, and frost started forming on the leaves around us. That's when I heard it. A voice, deeper than any human voice should be, speaking in the old mountain dialect my great-grandfather used to use. "Jefferson McLeod," it said. "Blood of my blood, come forth." The voice was coming from the direction of the still. Uncle Silas grabbed my arm. "Don't go down there, Jeff, please. Just turn around and leave. Forget you saw any of this." But I couldn't. Those federal agents were down there, and they needed help. I pulled free from my uncle's grip and started walking toward the voice. "I'm coming," I called out, "but I'm coming as a United States Forest Ranger, and I'm taking those men with me." The laughter that answered me made every bird in the forest go silent. What I saw when I reached that clearing changed everything I thought I knew about the world. The still was old, probably the original one my great-great-grandfather built in 1847. It was made of copper that gleamed like gold in the firelight, connected to a maze of pipes and barrels that should have been falling apart after 127 years. Instead, it looked brand new. But it wasn't the still that made my knees go weak. Standing beside it was something that might have been a man once, but wasn't anymore. It was 8 feet tall and built like a giant, with muscles that looked like they were carved from stone. Its skin was black as charcoal, but not burned, more like it was made of coal itself. Fire danced around its hands and feet without burning it. Its eyes glowed red like the coals in a forge, and it was looking right at me. "Jefferson McLeod," it said again, "you have come far from the family path." I tried to speak, but no sound came out. My pistol was in my holster, but my hand wouldn't move to draw it. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to run, but my feet felt like they were nailed to the ground. "Speak, child of McLeod blood." I'm here for the federal agents." The thing tilted its head like it was considering this. "These men came to destroy what your family has built. They would pour out the sacred whiskey and break the sacred copper. Why do you protect them? Because it's my job. Because it's right. Right?" The creature laughed, and when it did, the fire around the still flared up 20 feet high. "Your great-great-grandfather knew what was right. When the year of hunger came, when his children were dying, he called to me. He offered me a bargain." "What kind of bargain?" "Protection for the McLeod stills, prosperity for the McLeod family, and in return, every 7 years, a sacrifice. Blood to feed the ancient contract." My uncle stepped into the clearing behind me. "Jeff, it's kept our family safe for over 100 years. Through the Civil War, through Prohibition, through every federal raid. As long as we honor the old ways, it protects us." I looked at the 2 federal agents tied to the trees. They were staring at the creature with pure terror in their eyes. The young one, Patterson, had fainted. The older one, Rodriguez, was praying in Spanish under his breath. "You want to sacrifice them," I said. "Not want," the creature corrected. "Need. The contract requires payment. 7 years ago, I took a federal agent who tried to destroy the widow Henderson's still. 7 years before that, a state trooper. It is the way. It's murder. It is survival." The creature stepped closer to me, and I could feel heat rolling off its body like standing next to a bonfire. "But you, Jefferson McLeod, present an interesting problem. You carry McLeod blood, yet you serve those who would destroy us. You are Ranger and Moonshiner both." Uncle Silas moved to stand beside the creature. "He chose his side long ago. He's no kin of mine." "Blood is blood," the creature said, "and I smell the old knowledge in him. Tell me, Ranger, do you know the words your great-great-grandfather spoke when he called me forth?" I didn't, but suddenly I found myself remembering my grandmother's lullabies. Words in the old dialect that I'd never understood as a child. Words that seemed to burn in my throat now as I remembered them. "I see that you do." The creature smiled, showing teeth like iron nails. "Then you understand the choice before you. Join your family in the old ways, and these men die quickly. Oppose us, and—" It gestured toward the federal agents. As I watched, the copper wire binding them began to glow red hot. Both men screamed as it burned into their skin. "Stop it." The creature held up one burning hand, and the wire cooled. "Choose quickly, Jefferson McLeod. Time grows short." I looked at my uncle, who wouldn't meet my eyes. I looked at the federal agents, one unconscious and one begging me with his eyes. I looked at the still that represented 5 generations of my family's livelihood. And I made my choice. If I agree to honor the old ways, you'll let them go. The creature's grin got wider. I did not say that. I said they would die quickly instead of slowly. The contract requires payment, and they are the payment. Then the contract can go to hell. I drew my pistol and put 6 rounds center mass into the creature's chest. The bullets hit and bounced off like I was shooting at a stone wall. The creature looked down at the bullet holes in its skin, then up at me. "Iron," it said thoughtfully. I had forgotten how iron feels. The bullet holes were already closing up, but it has been many years since I faced consecrated iron. I had no idea what it meant by consecrated iron, but I knew I was in trouble. My gun was empty, and the creature was stepping toward me with fire dancing around its claws. That's when Uncle Silas did something I'll never understand. He stepped between me and the creature. "No," he said, "not the boy. Do not interfere, old man. You summoned me to collect payment. I summoned you to protect the family. He's family." The creature looked at my uncle like he was a bug it was deciding whether to step on. He chose law over blood. He chose outsiders over kin. He is no longer family. He's my brother's son. And you are nothing to me but a voice in the dark. The creature backhanded my uncle, sending him flying 20 feet through the air to crash into a tree. He hit with a sound like breaking sticks and didn't get up. I ran to him, but I could tell he was hurt bad. Maybe dying. Uncle Silas? He grabbed my shirt with a bloody hand. The original still? He whispered. Iron nails, blessed by Preacher Williams. 1847. In the base. He coughed up blood, and his eyes went glassy. Uncle Silas? But he was gone. Behind me, the creature laughed. How touching. But his sacrifice changes nothing. You have 1 hour to decide, Jefferson McLeod. Honor the contract, or watch these men burn for days. The creature walked back to the still and began working the machinery. I could hear liquid bubbling through the pipes, smell the sharp scent of high-proof alcohol. It was making moonshine while it waited for my answer. I looked at the base of the still and saw what my uncle meant. There were iron nails driven into the copper, old nails that were black with age. And carved into each nail was a tiny cross. Consecrated iron. Blessed iron. If I could get those nails out, maybe I could hurt this thing. But first, I had to figure out how to get close enough to try. I had maybe 50 minutes before the creature expected my answer. The federal agents were still tied up, both of them conscious now and watching me with desperate eyes. Agent Rodriguez kept trying to mouth words at me, but I couldn't understand what he was saying. The creature was busy with the still, adding wood to the fire underneath, and checking the flow through the copper pipes. For something that looked like it came straight from hell, it sure knew how to make moonshine. I needed a plan, and I needed it fast. I remembered the old stories my grandmother used to tell about fighting demons. She always said you had to know their rules, because even demons had rules they couldn't break. This thing had made a contract with my great-great-grandfather, and contracts have terms. I decided to test something. Hey, I called out. You said the contract requires payment every 7 years. The creature looked up from the still. Yes. Who decides what the payment is? The contract decides. But my family summoned you, so my family made the terms. The creature stopped what it was doing and turned to face me fully. What is your meaning, Ranger? I'm McLeod Blood. If Uncle Silas could summon you, then I can too. And if I can summon you, then I can modify the contract. The creature's eyes flared brighter. You know nothing of such things. Then teach me, or are you afraid I'll find a loophole? I was bluffing, gambling that this thing's pride was bigger than its patience. Demons, according to my grandmother, were prideful creatures. The gamble paid off. Very well, the creature said. I will teach you the nature of our bargain. It gestured, and suddenly, I could see things that hadn't been there before. Ghostly figures standing around the still, generations of McLeod men, all watching me. I recognized my grandfather, my great-grandfather, men I'd only seen in old photographs. And standing at the front of the group was a man who looked just like me, but wearing clothes from the 1842. My great-great-grandfather, Angus McLeod. Tell him, Angus, the creature said. Tell your blood kin what you promised me. The ghostly figure of my ancestor stepped forward. When he spoke, his voice sounded like it was coming from the bottom of a well. I was hungry, he said. My children were starving. The year of the Great Blight, when the corn wouldn't grow and the game disappeared from the mountains. I had knowledge of the old ways from my grandmother in Scotland. I called to the spirits of the deep places, and this one answered. What did you promise it? Protection of my family's stills for as long as McLeod Blood ran them. Prosperity and safety from the law, and in payment, every 7 years, the blood of an enemy. The creature nodded. A fair bargain. Your family has grown wealthy and safe under my protection. But I don't run a still, I said. I'm a ranger. I enforce the law against stills. Yet, you are McLeod Blood. The contract follows blood, not choice. I looked at the ghostly figure of my great-great-grandfather. What if I want to change the terms? The contract cannot be changed, the creature said. Only ended. How? How? Destroy the still with consecrated iron while speaking the words of unbinding. But know this, if you end our contract, you end the protection for all McLeod Blood. Your family will face every enemy without my aid. I looked around at the ghostly figures of my ancestors. They were all staring at me with expressions I couldn't read. Disappointment, hope, fear. What are the words of unbinding? The creature's grin faded. You would destroy what your ancestors built? I would free what my ancestors enslaved. Very well. The creature spoke words in a language that hurt my ears to hear. But somehow I understood them. They were words of release, of ending, of setting free, but there was a catch. The words must be spoken while holding consecrated iron, the creature said. And the one who speaks them must offer their own blood to seal the ending. How much blood? How much blood? All of it. The federal agents were listening to everything. Agent Rodriguez was shaking his head frantically, trying to tell me not to do it. But I thought about Uncle Silas lying dead by that tree. I thought about my family, bound to this thing for 127 years, unable to change or grow or move beyond the old ways. I thought about the fear in my ancestors' ghostly faces. Some things are worth dying for. I'll do it, I said. The creature laughed. You would die to save two men you do not know? I'd die to save my family from you. That wiped the grin right off its face. I walked over to the still and knelt down by the base. The iron nails were driven deep into the copper, and they were hot from the fire underneath. I grabbed the first one and tried to pull it out. The pain was incredible. The iron was burning hot, and as soon as I touched it, I could feel power flowing through it. Old power, blessed power, the kind that demons fear. The creature roared and lunged at me, but something stopped it short. It couldn't get within 5 feet of the still while I was holding consecrated iron. Stop, it screamed. You do not know what you are doing. I pulled the first nail free, burning my hand in the process. The still shuddered, and one of the copper pipes cracked. The ghostly figures of my ancestors were fading now, called back to whatever rest they'd found. But just before my great-great-grandfather disappeared, he smiled at me and nodded. Thank you, he whispered. I grabbed the second nail. This one was deeper and harder to pull. The creature was circling around me like a caged animal, snarling and cursing in that ancient language. Your family will suffer without my protection. My family will be free. The second nail came loose, and another pipe burst. Moonshine began pouring out onto the ground, and where it touched the earth, flowers began to bloom. Real flowers, not the burned and twisted plants that grew near the creature. 2 more nails to go. The third nail was the hardest yet. My hands were burned and bleeding, and the pain was making me dizzy. But I could hear Agent Rodriguez calling out encouragement, and that kept me going. When the third nail came free, the whole still collapsed on one side. The creature screamed like a wounded animal. 1 nail left. But this last nail was different. It was driven not into the base of the still, but into the ground underneath it. And carved on its head was not just a cross, but words in the old language. As I grabbed it, I could suddenly read what it said. Freedom for the bound. The nail was so hot it was glowing red, but I held on. The words of unbinding were burning in my throat, ready to be spoken. If you destroy me, the creature said, I will take your uncle's soul with me. He summoned me tonight. His soul is forfeit. I looked over at Uncle Silas's body. Could the thing really claim his soul? You're lying. Look at him. Use the sight the iron gives you. I looked, and with the consecrated iron in my hand, I could see things differently. Uncle Silas's body was there, but his spirit was standing beside it, chained to the creature with bonds of shadow. Release him, I said. Abandon your task, and I will release him. I thought about my uncle, who'd tried to protect me at the end. I thought about the federal agents, who'd die if I stopped now. I thought about my family, bound to this creature for another 7 years, and 7 years after that, forever. I'm sorry, Uncle Silas, I whispered, and I pulled the last nail free. The words of unbinding poured out of me like water from a broken dam. The still collapsed completely, spilling 127 years' worth of accumulated moonshine onto the ground. The creature screamed once, long and loud, and then it was gone. So was Uncle Silas's spirit. So was I. The last thing I remember was falling forward into the dirt, my hands burned beyond healing, my blood soaking into the ground where the still had stood. And then everything went black. I woke up in a hospital in Knoxville 3 days later. My hands were wrapped in bandages, and my throat felt like I'd been breathing smoke for a week. But I was alive. Agent Rodriguez was sitting in a chair next to my bed. His arms were bandaged where the copper wire had burned him. But he looked like he'd recover. How's Patterson? I asked. He'll be okay. Physically, anyway. He might need some time to deal with what he saw. Do you believe it happened? Rodriguez was quiet for a long moment. Officially, we were caught in a wildfire while investigating an illegal still operation. The heat made us hallucinate. We got hurt when some equipment exploded. And unofficially, I owe you my life. And Patterson's. Whatever that thing was, you stopped it. At a cost. Rodriguez nodded. He'd seen the ghostly figures too. He knew I'd condemned my uncle's soul to save theirs. The ATF is dropping the investigation into your family's operation, he said. There's nothing left to investigate. The still was destroyed in the fire, and your uncle was killed trying to help us escape. It was a good cover story, better than the truth. What about my family? As far as we're concerned, they were never involved in any illegal activity. Your uncle was just a helpful local who died a hero. I spent 2 weeks in that hospital. When I got out, I drove back up to Hellfire Hollow. The clearing where the still had been was different now. Instead of burned, twisted plants, there were wildflowers everywhere. The creek ran clear instead of carrying the chemical taste of moonshine runoff. And the animals had come back: deer, rabbits, squirrels, all the life that had been scared away by 127 years of demonic presence. But there was no sign of my family. I drove to Uncle Silas's house and found it empty. I went to my cousin Henry's place, no one home. I checked every McLeod homestead in the county, and they were all abandoned. My family had packed up and left, all of them. They'd lost their supernatural protection, and they knew federal agents would come eventually. So they disappeared into the mountains, probably scattered to relatives in other states. I never saw any of them again. I kept working as a ranger for another 15 years. I became something of an expert on illegal still operations, helping other rangers identify and shut down moonshine operations all across Tennessee. But I never forgot what I'd learned in Hellfire Hollow. There are things in these mountains older than the law, older than the government, older than any of us. Some of them are evil, like the creature my family had bound to their still. But some of them are just different, following rules we don't understand. I learned to tell the difference. I also learned that sometimes doing the right thing costs more than you ever imagined you'd have to pay. I saved 2 federal agents and freed my family from a century-old curse. But I lost my uncle's soul. And I lost every blood relative I had left in the world. Sometimes I wonder if it was worth it. Then I remember Agent Patterson, who went home to his wife and kids after Hellfire Hollow. I remember Agent Rodriguez, who wrote me a letter every Christmas for 10 years, thanking me for giving him back his life. I remember my great-great-grandfather's smile when the old contract was finally broken. And I know I made the right choice. But late at night, when the wind is blowing through these mountains, I sometimes hear bluegrass music in the distance. And sometimes, just for a second, I think I hear my Uncle Silas's voice calling my name. I hope wherever his soul ended up, he understands why I had to let him go. I hope he forgives me, because I'm not sure I'll ever forgive myself. My name is Michael Kowalski, but everyone calls me Mick. I've been a forest ranger for 14 years now, and I've seen pretty much everything these West Virginia mountains can throw at you. Dead hikers, meth labs, illegal dumping, you name it. But what happened at Widow's Creek Mine in September of 1981 still keeps me awake some nights. I guess I should tell you about my dad first. Stanley Kowalski came over from Poland in 1952, with nothing but the clothes on his back and a strong pair of hands. He went straight into the coal mines like most immigrants did back then. Died in a cave-in when I was 9, crushed under 1 million tons of rock and coal. That's when I learned to hate everything about mining. The stories, the folklore, especially those stupid ghost tales the old-timers loved to tell. Dead's dead, I always said, and mines are just holes in the ground, full of bad air. By 1981, I was 35 with a wife named Linda and 2 boys, ages 8 and 6. After Vietnam and college on the GI Bill, I'd carved out a decent life as a ranger specializing in hazardous site cleanup. My territory covered 1,200 square miles, including 23 abandoned mines that the EPA was trying to figure out how to fix. Most people don't realize how dangerous these old sites are. We're not just talking about cave-ins. There's methane gas that can blow you to pieces, acid water that'll burn your skin off, and poison in the soil that kills everything for miles around. That's why they called me whenever something went wrong at one of these places. The call came in on September 15th, around 6 in the morning. I was drinking coffee and reading reports when the phone rang. "Mick, we got a problem," said Tom Bradley from the EPA regional office. "Widow's Creek mine. Seismic activity last night, and we're getting methane readings from sensors that should be dead." Widow's Creek was one of the worst sites in my district. The mine had operated from 1897 to 1962, when a methane explosion killed 19 men and sealed the place permanently. Since then, it had been leaking poison into the groundwater and killing everything downstream. The EPA had been studying it for cleanup since 1980. "What kind of readings?" I asked. "That's the weird part. We should be seeing dangerous gas levels, but the monitors are showing clean air. Almost like something's ventilating the mine from inside." "Impossible. Those tunnels have been sealed for 20 years. That's not all. Dr. Elizabeth Warren, the geologist we sent up there 3 days ago, hasn't checked in. Her satellite phone isn't working, and we can't raise her on radio." I knew the area well. Widow's Creek sat about 8 miles up a mountain road that had been falling apart since the mine closed. No cell service, radio blocked by iron ore deposits, and the nearest town was Thurmond, which had exactly 3 residents left. "I'll head up there this morning," I said. "Probably just equipment failure and bad weather." "Maybe, but Mick, be careful up there. The locals have been calling our office with strange reports. Lights in the mine at night, sounds of machinery running. Could be squatters or drug labs, but what? Some of them swear they can hear the mine whistle blowing at shift change time, 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. every day." I almost laughed. The mine whistle had been destroyed in 1963. But I'd learned not to dismiss everything locals reported. Sometimes they noticed things that outsiders missed. "I'll check it out," I said. After hanging up, I gathered my gear. Gas detector, emergency air supply, flashlights, rope, first aid kit, and my radio, though it probably wouldn't work up there. I also grabbed the structural engineering reports from the 1962 disaster. If Dr. Warren had gotten herself into trouble, I'd need to know the mine layout. The drive up took 2 hours on roads that were more like creek beds. My truck bounced and slid through mud that hadn't dried since the rain started 5 days ago. The higher I climbed, the more dead everything looked. Acid runoff from the mine had turned the creek orange and killed every tree for miles around. When I finally reached the mine site, the first thing that hit me was how quiet it was. No birds, no insects, no wind, just dead silence under a gray sky that looked like it was pressing down on the mountain. Dr. Warren's camp was set up about 50 yards from the main entrance, a concrete barrier that had been built to seal the mine in 1962. Her equipment was still there, sophisticated geological gear worth more than I made in a year. But her sleeping bag looked like it hadn't been slept in, and her notebook was sitting open on a folding table. I flipped through the pages. Her handwriting started neat and scientific, then got messier as the entries went on. Asterisk. Day 1. Initial gas readings normal. Structural damage less than expected. Asterisk. Asterisk. Day 2. Equipment malfunction. Getting clean air readings in areas that should be toxic. Electromagnetic interference with instruments. Asterisk. Asterisk. Day 3. Can hear sounds from inside the sealed mine. Rhythmic hammering, like maintenance work. Probably settling or groundwater, but very regular. Asterisk. The final entry, written in shaky letters, made my skin crawl. Asterisk. They're still working. I can hear the shifts changing. Asterisk. I looked up at the mine entrance. The concrete seal was intact, but I could see places where the metal had rusted through over the years. Big enough for a person to squeeze through, but not without serious risk. That's when I heard it. A low rumble from deep underground, like heavy machinery starting up. Impossible, of course. There was no power up here, no way to run equipment. But the sound was definitely coming from inside the mountain. As I stood there listening, my watch stopped working. Then my radio started picking up static, not random noise, but something that almost sounded like voices. Testing, testing. This is Henderson, at Shaft 7. Report gas levels. The voice was faint but clear. I checked my radio frequency. It was set to the emergency channel that rangers used. No one should have been transmitting on it, especially not from inside a sealed mine. I tried to respond. "This is Ranger Kowalski. Who is this? What's your location?" Nothing but static. Then, after a few seconds, "New man on the crew? Report to the foreman's office for safety briefing." The transmission cut off. I stood there, staring at my radio, trying to make sense of what I'd heard. Someone was definitely in that mine, but who? And how had they gotten past the sealed entrance? I walked over to the concrete barrier and examined it more closely. The rust holes were bigger than they'd looked from a distance. With some effort, I could probably squeeze through. But everything in my training told me not to enter a sealed mine alone, especially one with a history of gas explosions. Still, if Dr. Warren was trapped in there, I was reaching for my gas detector when I noticed something that made me freeze. There, in the mud near the entrance, were footprints. Several sets, all wearing heavy work boots. They led from the mine entrance toward the equipment shed, then back again. Fresh footprints, made sometime in the last day or two. But here's what really bothered me. The prints were coming out of the mine, not going in. I spent the next hour checking every inch of Dr. Warren's camp, looking for clues about where she might have gone. Her personal gear was all there, clothes, food, even her wallet. Nobody leaves for a hike without taking their water bottle, but hers was sitting full on the camp table. The footprints were the strangest part. I counted at least 6 different sets of boots, all heavy work style. They came out of the mine entrance and wandered around the campsite, then went back in. Like a group of workers had finished a shift and stopped to look around before heading back underground. But that was impossible. The mine had been sealed since 1962. I checked my gas detector near the entrance. Clean air, which made no sense. After 20 years of decay, those tunnels should have been full of methane, hydrogen sulfide, and carbon monoxide. Instead, my instruments were reading better air quality than outside. The sounds from underground had stopped, but my radio kept picking up strange transmissions. Static mostly, but every few minutes I'd catch fragments of voices. Check the ventilation in Tunnel C. Fresh timber needed at Shaft 6. Henderson wants everyone topside for safety meeting. I tried responding again, but got no answer. The voices seemed to be talking to each other, not to me. At noon, I heard the mine whistle. It was faint, but unmistakable. 3 long blasts that echoed off the mountain walls, the same signal that had called miners to lunch for 60 years. I felt the hair on my arms stand up, because I knew that whistle had been destroyed 20 years ago. That's when I decided to go in. I put on my hard hat, clipped the gas detector to my belt, and grabbed my brightest flashlight. The gap in the concrete seal was tight, but I managed to squeeze through into absolute darkness. The smell hit me first. Not the poisonous gases I expected, but something else. Machine oil, coal dust, and cigarette smoke. Like people had been working in there recently. My flashlight beam showed a tunnel that stretched ahead into blackness. The walls were shored up with wooden beams that looked solid, not rotted like they should have been. I took a few steps inside, testing each footfall. The tunnel floor was covered with fresh coal dust and railroad tracks that showed signs of recent use. Impossible, but there it was. About 50 yards in, I found a posted notice on a wooden bulletin board. Safety reminder: all shifts. Check gas levels every 30 minutes. Report structural problems immediately. No smoking in tunnel areas. Bill Henderson, mine foreman. The paper looked new, not yellowed or aged like it should have been after 20 years. And there was a date at the bottom, the 15th of September, 1962. 19 years to the day before I was standing there reading it. My hands started shaking as I continued deeper into the mine. The tunnel branched off in several directions, following the coal seams. According to the maps I'd studied, the main shaft went down about 400 feet into the mountain. That's where the 1962 explosion had happened. I was trying to decide which branch to take when I heard footsteps behind me. Not echoes of my own steps, definitely someone else walking. Heavy boots on rock, getting closer. I spun around and called out, "Hello? Dr. Warren?" The footsteps stopped. My flashlight beam showed empty tunnels stretching back to the entrance. But I could feel someone watching me from the darkness. "Who's there?" I called. "This is Ranger Kowalski. If you're in trouble, I'm here to help." A voice answered from somewhere in the shadows. "You shouldn't be down here without proper safety gear, son." The accent was Appalachian, but with an old-fashioned formality that people don't use anymore. I turned my light toward the voice but saw nothing. "Where are you?" I asked. "I can't see you." "Right here." The voice came from directly behind me. I spun around and nearly dropped my flashlight. Standing about 10 feet away was a man in work clothes. Denim overalls, flannel shirt, hard hat with a carbide lamp. He was covered in coal dust and holding a lunch pail, like he'd just finished his shift. But I could see the tunnel wall through his chest. "Jesus," I whispered. "Name's Bill Henderson," the figure said, tipping his hard hat. "Mine foreman." "You're the new safety inspector?" I stared at him, my brain trying to process what I was seeing. The man looked solid, except for that transparent quality. And he was talking to me like everything was normal. I'm looking for Dr. Warren," I managed to say, "a woman geologist. Have you seen her?" Henderson frowned. "Warren? Don't have anyone by that name on the crew." "You sure you got the right mine? She's been missing for 3 days. 3 days? Son, I just saw the whole crew this morning at shift change. Nobody's missing." That's when I noticed other figures moving in the tunnels behind him. Men in work clothes, carrying tools and lunch pails. They walked past us like I wasn't there, heading deeper into the mine. I counted 7, 8, 10 of them. All translucent, all looking like they belonged in 1962. "What year do you think this is?" I asked Henderson. He gave me a strange look. "September 1962, of course. What kind of question is that?" My throat felt dry. "Mr. Henderson, I need to tell you something. There was an explosion in this mine. On September 15th, 1962. 19 men died, including you." Henderson laughed. "That's nonsense, son. I'm standing right here talking to you. Do I look dead?" Before I could answer, one of the other miners called out, "Bill, we got gas building up in shaft 7. Better check the ventilation." Henderson's expression changed instantly. "Gas buildup? How bad?" "Bad enough. Jimmy's reading dangerous levels." I watched Henderson's face go pale. "Not again," he whispered. Then louder. "All right, everybody topside. Emergency evacuation." The miners started moving quickly toward the entrance, but Henderson grabbed my arm. His hand felt solid and warm. "You need to get out of here right now," he said. "If that gas ignites..." "Mr. Henderson, listen to me. The explosion already happened. 20 years ago. You've been dead since 1962. But he was already running toward the deeper tunnels, shouting orders to his crew. I followed him, my flashlight beam bouncing off the tunnel walls. The air started to smell like rotten eggs. Hydrogen sulfide, one of the most dangerous gases in mining. That's when I found Dr. Warren. She was about 200 yards into the main shaft, working alongside the ghost miners like she'd been part of the crew for years. She wore a hard hat and work clothes that looked like they came from 1962, and she was shoveling coal into a cart like her life depended on it. "Dr. Warren," I called. She looked up, but there was no recognition in her eyes. "Who are you?" "You're not supposed to be in this section without clearance from Henderson." "Elizabeth, it's me, Ranger Kowalski. I'm here to get you out." "Get me out? Why would I want to leave? We've got work to finish before the 7 o'clock shift change." I looked around at the scene. The ghost miners were working frantically, checking gas levels, reinforcing tunnel supports, moving equipment. All of them, including Dr. Warren, seemed desperate to complete some urgent task. "What work?" I asked. "Preventing the explosion, of course," she said, like I was stupid. "If we don't get the ventilation fixed and the gas cleared out, 19 men are going to die." The horrible truth hit me like a physical blow. These spirits were trapped in an endless loop, reliving the day of the disaster over and over again. They thought they could prevent it if they just worked hard enough, fast enough, careful enough. And somehow, Dr. Warren had gotten pulled into their reality. "Elizabeth, the explosion already happened," I said gently. "It's 1981, not 1962. You're a geologist, not a miner." She stared at me like I was insane. "That's impossible. Look around you. Can't you see we're all working?" I could see them working. That was the problem. Henderson's voice echoed through the tunnels. "Gas levels critical. Everyone out now." The miners started running for the exit, and Dr. Warren ran with them. I followed, my mind racing. If these spirits were reliving the disaster, And if Dr. Warren was caught up in it somehow, what would happen when we reached the critical moment? What happens when 1962 September 15th hits 7 p.m.? I chased after Dr. Warren and the miners, my flashlight beam dancing wildly across the tunnel walls. They moved fast, with the desperate urgency of men who knew death was breathing down their necks. But they weren't running toward the exit, they were heading deeper into the mine. "Wrong way," I shouted. "The exit's behind us." Henderson turned back to me, his face grim. "Can't leave yet, son. Got to shut off the gas valves and check the main ventilation shaft. Otherwise the whole mountain could blow. Mr. Henderson, please listen to me. You can't prevent this. It already happened 20 years ago." But he was already moving again, leading his crew deeper into the earth. Dr. Warren stayed close to the group, completely absorbed in their reality. When I tried to grab her arm, she shook me off. "Don't interfere," she snapped. "People are going to die if we don't do our jobs." I followed them down a side tunnel I'd never seen on any mine map. The walls here were different, carved out of solid rock instead of shored up with timber. Strange symbols were scratched into the stone, and the air felt heavier, like the mountain itself was pressing down on us. My gas detector started beeping, methane levels rising. "Henderson," I called. "My instruments showed dangerous gas buildup." "We know," one of the other miners replied. "That's why we're here." They led me to a large chamber carved out of the living rock. In the center stood an enormous piece of machinery, a ventilation fan the size of a truck engine. It was running, pushing air through the tunnels with a sound like thunder. But according to everything I knew about this mine, that fan had been destroyed in the 1962 explosion. Henderson was checking gauges and adjusting valves with practiced efficiency. "Jimmy, how are the readings in Shaft 7? A young miner ran up with a gas detector identical to mine. "Still climbing, Bill. We're at 40% of explosive levels and rising fast." "Damn it, the main gas pocket must have shifted again." Henderson turned to me. "You said you're a safety inspector? Then you know we can't let this gas ignite." I looked around the chamber and felt reality shift around me. The walls seemed to flicker between 1962 and 1981. Sometimes I saw the modern concrete seals and rust stains. Other times I saw fresh timber supports and newly painted safety signs. "What happens if you can't stop it?" I asked. Henderson's face went pale. 19 good men D, including most of my crew. "And then what?" "Then," he paused, looking confused for the first time. "Then we start over. Try again. Do better next time." The horrible truth was starting to make sense. These men had died in the explosion, but their spirits remained trapped at the moment of disaster. Every day, they relived September 15th, 1962, desperately trying to prevent the tragedy that had already claimed their lives. And somehow, Dr. Warren had gotten caught in the loop with them. Jimmy came running back with new readings. "Gas levels at 60%. Bill, we got maybe an hour before this whole place becomes a bomb." That's when I looked at my watch and felt my blood turn to ice. 6:15 p.m. According to the historical records, the Widows Creek mine explosion happened at 7:03 p.m. on September 15th, 1962. If these spirits were reliving that day, and if Dr. Warren was trapped in their timeline, what would happen when the clock hit 7:03? "Henderson, I need to get Dr. Warren out of here right now." "Warren? Who's Warren?" "The woman with your crew, Elizabeth." Henderson looked genuinely puzzled. "Son, we don't have any women working this mine. Company policy." I spun around, looking for Dr. Warren. She was gone. "Where is she? Where's the woman who was working with you? You feeling all right? You've been talking about this Warren person since you got here, but I haven't seen any woman." My mind reeled. If Henderson couldn't see her, but I could, what did that mean? Was she becoming a spirit too? Getting more trapped in their reality with each passing minute? I ran back toward the main tunnel, calling her name. My flashlight beam swept across empty passages and abandoned equipment. Then I heard her voice, faint and echoing. "Help me, I can't remember." Following the sound, I found her in a side chamber I hadn't seen before. She was sitting on the floor, looking confused and frightened. Her modern clothes were gone, replaced by 1962 work gear. But she looked more solid now, more present. "Elizabeth, it's Mick Kowalski. I'm here to help you." "Mick?" She looked up at me with recognition flickering in her eyes. What am I doing here? I remember setting up camp, taking readings, but then you got caught in something, a time loop. These miners died in 1962, but they keep reliving the day of the explosion, trying to prevent it. That's impossible. Look at what you're wearing. She looked down at her work clothes, then at her hands, which were dirty with coal dust. I don't understand. I'm a geologist. I don't work in mines. You do now. The longer you stay here, the more you become part of their reality. We need to get out before 7 o'clock. She stood up, wobbly but determined. How long have I been here? 3 days in real time. But here, you've been living the same day over and over again. We started moving toward the exit, but the tunnels had changed. Passages that had been there before were now blocked with coal falls. New tunnels had opened up that weren't on any map. The mine was shifting around us, rearranging itself to match the spirit's memory of how it should be. This way, Dr. Warren said, leading me down a tunnel I was sure hadn't existed 5 minutes earlier. How do you know where to go? I remember working these tunnels. For months, it feels like. But that's impossible, because I only arrived 3 days ago. My watch read 6:45 p.m., 18 minutes until the explosion. We moved as fast as we dared through tunnels that kept changing around us. Sometimes we passed the ghost miners, still working frantically to prevent the disaster. They nodded to Dr. Warren like she was part of the crew, but they looked right through me. They're getting more solid, Dr. Warren whispered. When I first saw them, they were just shadows. But now, she was right. The spirits were becoming more physical, more present, as we approached the moment of their death. And Dr. Warren was changing too, becoming more like them with each minute that passed. We reached a junction where 3 tunnels met. All of them looked familiar, but I couldn't tell which way led to the exit. This is wrong, I said. The mine layout is completely different from the maps. The maps are from after the explosion, Dr. Warren said. The blast changed everything. Collapsed tunnels, opened new ones. We're seeing the mine as it was before. Before the 19 men died, my gas detector was screaming now. Methane levels at 80% of explosive concentration. Any spark, any source of heat, and the whole place would become an inferno. Which way out? I asked. Dr. Warren pointed to the left tunnel. That way, I remember now. We always used that tunnel for emergency evacuation. But as we started toward it, Henderson appeared, blocking our path. He looked more solid than ever, and his face was grim with determination. Nobody leaves, he said. Not until we fix this gas problem. Mr. Henderson, you can't fix it. You've been trying for 20 years. Then we'll try for 20 more, however long it takes to save my men. Other miners appeared behind him, forming a wall of ghostly determination. Dr. Warren took a step toward them, and I saw her beginning to fade back into their reality. Elizabeth, don't listen to them. We have to go. But she was shaking her head. Mick, these men are going to die if we don't help them. I can feel their fear, their desperation. How can we just leave? My watch reads 6:58 p.m. 5 minutes until the explosion that would trap us all in this endless loop forever. Elizabeth, step away from them, I said, trying to keep my voice calm while my heart hammered against my ribs. But she was already moving toward Henderson and his crew, her form becoming more translucent with each step. In 4 minutes, the explosion would happen, and she would die along with the rest of them. Then she'd be trapped forever, reliving this day over and over, desperately trying to save men who were already dead. I have to help, she said. I know how to fix the ventilation system. Modern engineering techniques they never tried. Henderson smiled at her with genuine warmth. That's my girl. Always thinking, always trying to save the day. My girl. Like she'd been part of his crew for years, instead of days. 7 p.m. Elizabeth, listen to me, I said desperately. What's your daughter's name? She paused, confusion flickering across her face. Your daughter, you mentioned her when you called the EPA last week. What's her name? I don't have a daughter. I work in the mines with Bill and the crew. No, you don't. You're Dr. Elizabeth Warren. You have a PhD in geology from Penn State. You live in Pittsburgh with your husband and your 8-year-old daughter. Think. For a moment, uncertainty crept into her eyes. Sarah, she whispered. My daughter's name is Sarah. That's right, and she's waiting for you to come home. Henderson stepped between us. Enough talk. We got work to do. He looked directly at me for the first time, and his eyes were black as coal. "You can join us permanent or you can leave. But the woman stays. She's part of my crew now." 7:01 p.m. I could hear the gas hissing through the tunnels like a living thing. My detector was maxed out. One spark and the whole mountain would explode. But I finally understood what was really happening here. These spirits weren't just trapped in a time loop. They were feeding off the living, pulling people into their reality to give them the strength to maintain their existence. Dr. Warren wasn't the first. Over the years, hikers and researchers had disappeared near this mine. The locals knew to stay away, but outsiders didn't understand the danger. "Mr. Henderson," I said, "I know who you are. William Henderson, age 43, mine foreman for 15 years, died September 15, 1962, trying to evacuate your crew." Henderson's form solidified, becoming more present and threatening. "I didn't die. I'm standing right here. You died trying to save 19 men, including my father." That stopped him cold. "Your father?" 7:02 p.m. "Stanley Kowalski. He was working shaft 7 when the gas exploded. You died trying to get him out." Henderson's eyes widened with recognition. "Stanley? Polish fellow? Worked the deep tunnels?" "That's right. He talked about you at home. Said you were the best foreman he ever worked for. Said you treated the immigrant workers fair when others didn't." Stanley had a boy, little Mike, about 10 years old. "That's me, Michael Kowalski. And I'm here to tell you that you did save him." 7:03 p.m. The minute hand hit the exact moment of the historical explosion. I felt the mountain hold its breath, waiting for the spark that would kill us all. But nothing happened. Henderson stared at me, his form flickering between solid and translucent. "What do you mean? I saved him?" "Stanley died in the explosion, but because of that, I never went into the mines. I became a forest ranger instead. I got an education, married a good woman, had 2 sons. Your sacrifice saved Stanley's family line." The other miners had stopped their frantic work and were gathering around us. I could see their faces clearly now. Young men and old, all wearing the exhaustion of people who'd been fighting a hopeless battle for 20 years. 7:04 p.m. We were past the moment of the explosion, but it still hadn't happened. "Mr. Henderson, you've been trying to save these men for 2 decades, but you already saved them. Their families, their children, their children's children. They all lived because word of this disaster made mining safer. You didn't die for nothing." Dr. Warren was becoming solid again, her modern clothes returning. She looked around in confusion, like she was waking up from a long dream. "The explosion," Henderson said slowly, "it should have happened by now. It did happen, 20 years ago, and 19 good men died, including you. But their deaths meant something. Safety regulations changed. Other mines became safer. Families like mine survived because of what you learned here." I reached into my pocket and pulled out something I'd carried for 20 years, my father's mining helmet. The one they'd pulled from the rubble after the cave-in that killed him. "This is all I have left of Stanley Kowalski. He died in a different mine, but he died the same way you did, trying to protect his crew. He used to tell me stories about brave foremen who looked out for their workers, stories about men like you." Henderson reached out and touched the helmet. His hand passed through it like smoke. "I can't save them," he said, and his voice was full of 20 years of accumulated grief. "I've tried and tried, but I can't change what happened. You don't need to save them, you need to let them rest." One by one, the other miners stepped forward. I could see the exhaustion in their faces, the bone-deep weariness of men who'd been fighting a hopeless battle for 2 decades. "Bill," said the young miner named Jimmy, "I'm tired." "We're all tired," said another. "Maybe it's time to stop." Dr. Warren took my hand, her grip solid and warm and completely human. "I remember now," she said. "I remember my daughter, my real life." "How did you know to break the spell?" "My father used to tell me about mining traditions," I said. "How the crews looked out for each other, how the foreman's job was to get everyone home safe. These men needed to know their sacrifice mattered. They needed permission to rest." Henderson looked at his crew, then back at me. "You'll tell people what happened here? About my boys?" "I'll tell them. And I'll make sure this mine stays sealed. No one else will get trapped down here." For the first time in 20 years, Bill Henderson smiled. "All right then. Crew dismissed. Shift's over." The miners began to fade, one by one, finally heading home after the longest shift in history. Henderson was the last to go. "Take care of yourself, Stanley's boy, and tell your sons about the men who worked these mountains." Then he was gone, and Dr. Warren and I were alone in a tunnel that was suddenly empty and quiet. We found the real exit easily once the spirits released their hold on the mine. The tunnels returned to their actual layout, collapsed, flooded, and dangerous, as they should have been after 20 years of decay. My gas detector started reading normal methane levels for an abandoned mine, high enough to be lethal if you weren't careful, but nothing like the explosive concentrations we'd experienced in the spirit realm. Dr. Warren was weak but alert as I helped her through the gap in the concrete seal. The first thing she did when we got outside was call her daughter on the satellite phone. "Sarah? Honey, it's Mommy. Yes, I know it's late. I just wanted to hear your voice." While she talked to her family, I looked back at the mine entrance. It looked different somehow. Smaller, less threatening. Just a hole in the ground with a concrete barrier, like it was supposed to be. The EPA arrived the next morning with a full hazmat team. The official report stated that seismic activity had caused unusual gas venting, which explained the electromagnetic interference and equipment malfunctions. Dr. Warren was treated for mild gas exposure and exhaustion. She corroborated the official story, never mentioning the spirits or the time loop. But she pulled me aside before she left. "What really happened down there?" she said quietly. "That was real, wasn't it? What do you remember?" "Everything. Working the mine for months, even though it was only 3 days. Feeling like I belonged to that crew, like I'd always been there, and then you helped me remember who I really was. The important thing is that you're going home to your daughter." She nodded, then asked, "What about you? How did you know what to say to break the spell?" I thought about it for a moment. My father died in the mines when I was 9. I spent my whole life hating everything about mining, the work, the culture, the stories, but down there, I realized that hatred was just fear of ending up like him. And now I understand that mining wasn't what killed my father. It was dangerous conditions and companies that put profits over safety. The men who worked these mountains weren't the problem. They were trying to take care of their families the only way they knew how. After the EPA team finished their work, they installed new barriers and warning signs. But I knew the real danger was over. Without the spirits maintaining their supernatural pressure, the mine would decay naturally. In a few more years, it would be completely collapsed and safe. I kept my promise to Henderson. I researched the 19 men who died in the 1962 explosion and learned their stories. They were immigrants and locals, young men and experienced miners, all trying to make an honest living in dangerous work. I made sure their names were added to the memorial at the county courthouse. The mine whistle never blew again. But sometimes, when I drive past Widow's Creek on my patrol routes, I think I can hear something else. Laughter. Maybe. Or just the sound of men who finally got to rest after a long, hard shift. Dr. Warren sent me a Christmas card that year with a photo of her and her daughter. On the back she wrote, "Thank you for bringing me home. I've been a ranger for 30 years now, and I've learned something important. The mountains hold on to things, memories, stories, sometimes spirits. Most of the time, they're harmless. But occasionally, you run into something that needs help letting go. I still work the abandoned mine sites, making sure they're safe for the living. And I've never forgotten what Henderson told me about taking care of the crew. Whether they're living or dead, everybody deserves to go home at the end of the shift." These days, when I tuck my sons into bed, I tell them stories about the brave men who worked the deep tunnels. Not scary ghost stories, but tales of courage and brotherhood, and the kind of sacrifice that makes the world a little bit safer for the people who come after. Because sometimes, the best way to honor the dead is to remember that they were once alive, and that their lives meant something. Even in places like Widow's Creek Mine, where the coal ran out long ago but the stories remain.